Hello, everybody. It's Laura Eisenhower. I am joined today by an incredible group of individuals. They are amazing esoteric researchers and astrologers. And I'm going to have them tell you a little bit about themselves. Daniel Giamario, Jaime Goldstein, Adam Sanchez, and Sasha Rose are my guests. And thank you so much for joining me, you guys. It's so wonderful to meet you all. I know Adam and I know Sasha, but I'm meeting Jaime and Daniel for the first time. So this is like really exciting for me. I've heard so much about both of you and Daniel, my gosh. Your work is extraordinary, and we're gonna start with you to share some words about yourself.
Okay, sure. Great. Thank you. Wonderful to be here with all of you here today. I actually am one of these late 60s guys. I was in college in 1966 to 1970, and I got into astrology in 1969. And my main influence in those years was Dane Rajar, who was essentially the elder astrologer who influenced all us young astrologers back at that time period. And the main focus of his work was to take astrology away from prediction and into having it be specifically about helping people find their life purpose. And that has been the foundation of my whole work, so this is like what, 56, 57 years. I've been involved in building three schools. In the 1980s, it was called the Harbingers of the Turning of the Ages, and then formed a school called the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. And a couple of years ago, then we took it up to another level, which is called the Turning of the Ages Mystery School. My main inspiration as far as getting into this type of astrology was the Vision Quest experience I had on Mount Shasta in 1981. And it was at that point that it became clear to me that if I was going to continue to be an astrologer, it would have to be about the earth and the sky. So in our training programs, we don't train people in our methodology unless they also know about the cosmology and the astronomy and the stars directly. And so basically over the years, many decades now, sacred site trips, camping experiences, had the experience of locating some petroglyph sites that were unknown, then going to different lunar standstill sites like Callanish. My favorite places are different petroglyph sites that I found, and then also I built a stone circle in New Mexico at Faywood Hot Springs, and actually a large stone circle on the top of the hill there at the Hot Springs area. So I got to design that. And so for me, I guess the main inspirations have been like Northern Europe, Scotland, Ireland, a sort of a long Celtic background. Although my dad was Italian, my mother was the Celtic fringe, as it were, and so that's really been the thing that has inspired me the most. The land and the sky. It's called shamanic astrology, not because I consider myself a shaman, but because the work is connected to the shamanic traditions for what. Hundreds of thousands of years, and so we're trying to, at this great time period of the end of Kali Yuga, to try to keep people connected to their human 1.0 reality, and to remain connected to our spirit and soul, and that's really the main intention of our school, is to do astrology based on keeping people really human. And then also to follow up on Rajar's view from 71, which is we are the seed people. We're the seed people for whatever it is that may happen next, which we don't exactly know. In a sense, we are the seeds for what does come next. And that's the way of capturing and honoring the traditions of our predecessors that still work, but then to be open heartfully to what the new transmissions coming through are. So that's really the vision of our school. And so, I mean, other than the schools that I've taken responsibility for putting together, I'm just basically a journeyman astrologer. So in all the years that I've been doing this, it's probably at this point I've seen maybe 30,000 charts. So most of what I know comes from what I learned from each person, one person at a time. So it's an evolving body of knowledge. Nothing about it that is dogmatic, but it's like taking the best of what's happened in the past and putting it together in a format that really works for people today at a great turning.
Oh, so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and I agree. Gosh, I learned so much just doing the readings. I learned so much about the world, and it's like opening a book, a fascinating book each time, the uniqueness. I always, yeah, gosh. Think of, yeah, uh, this restructuring and rehabilitation of the human race and just the uniqueness of each of our charts is like these puzzle pieces are just like coming back together and how it's all linked to our DNA. It's like amazing. So, Jaime, tell us about yourself and some words about your work.
Oh, I'm so honored to be here. And just kind of going off of what Daniel shared, just such at the heart of my astrological practice is sitting out with the living sky and receiving direct downloads from the stars and the planets themselves. Sasha has been one of my biggest mentors on my journey, particularly sitting out and being witness to the Venus cycle in the sky, and then also the Venus cycle within myself. So I'm love being here with so many astrologers that have such a connection with the sky and the sky as being our teachers. And so, but with my background, so I was pre-Saturn return. I worked as a school psychologist in the schools, and I could just not resonate with working in the institution and the paradigm of our public schools. I wanted to create like so much transformation within that the Texas public schools that I was working with was not ready for. And so I left that in a leap of faith during my Saturn return, and I taught yoga and mindfulness full time for a few years. And that kind of led me into my astrology journey. And yeah, I love having just a direct connection with the sky being my teacher. I've studied different traditions within astrology, and I love sitting in sacred session. And one of coming full circle now that I have a beautiful 1 year old child is starting to merge the astrology back with parenting and how to inspire parents to use the wisdom of astrology to support the flourishing and the blossoming of their children, really supporting like the star seeds that are coming in. I have a big star seed connection, particularly with the Pleiadian constellation.
Wow, that's so great. Yeah, once I learned the charts raising kids, it just helps so much. When you really just get to know what the aspects are in behavior patterns and ancestral stuff, and oh my gosh, it can just bring so much clarity. It's incredible. So really wonderful to meet you. And Sasha Rose, yes, tell us about your work.
Hey, so I have been studying astrology for many years, over 30 years, but practicing for about 12 years since I really had this direct transmission watching Venus cross the face of the sun. I didn't even know there was a cycle at that point. I've been studying charts for years. I had no idea. And just had all of these connections happen to understand this beautiful merging of what we consider the heart connecting, collaborating, the way we give and receive love, and then meeting up with that sun energy, which is the energy, the life force energy, and how that creates a 19-month cycle that is actually an articulation of a heroine's journey. And so I was raised I had a very Aquarian upbringing. I was raised in a utopian, spiritual, international community. We were the ones who had come for this time. It was a bit apocalyptic at times with, what was coming, but we were here to save the day. So it was very interesting to be in this community that had these high visionary ideals, but they really had no understanding of how to help the most vulnerable youngest members, the children, to feel safe and cared for. So I got to see a lot of disconnects, and I got to see a lot about power dynamics. And I got to see a lot about what it means to be the outsider. Nothing like having the bus drop you off at your commune in your small New Hampshire town, and all the other kids are like, what's going on there? So I got that outsider perspective early on, and it's really not an easy one, but has really helped me to just look at culture and how do cultures form and how do we change culture. And so I became really inspired in 2000 after going to this very groovy college that was culture ecology and sustainable communities, with all of the sustainable people and the permaculture people and the natural builders, to really re-envision culture. And that's been an inquiry that I've been living inside of for the last 24 years, and really seeing how children are at the center of that. I went on to get my teaching credential and Montessori training, and really wanted to see these new paradigm school learning centers blossom. And like Jaime, I also came up against the limits of being in the institution. So I busted it out and decided to really go into astrology in 2012, and created this framework of how do we move with this life, death, and rebirth transformational process of the heroine's journey. So that's really become the center of my work. I guide visionary women into a personal heroine's journey using the Venus cycle. And I really tend to look at all of the astrology contained within those 19-month cycles. And it's been fascinating. And like Daniel and everyone saying, I'm always learning, and just in that spirit of curiosity and wanting to continue to evolve myself.
It's incredible. Wow. It's just so inspiring to just feel like this shift into this new earth. It's not even new. It's like the ancient and the indigenous and the true wisdom returning, and you guys are just like such leaders in that, and what you're like establishing and creating for our future generations. It's just tremendous. So thank you so much for being here. And Adam, my good friend Adam, and you just wrote a book, and tell us more about your work. I'm so excited.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Say again.
I'm just so excited that you're here. And yeah, we've been friends for a long time, and it's just really good to see you.
It's always a pleasure to connect with you, Laura. You're one of my favorite people on the planet. So, yeah, and I'm just so honored and delighted and excited to be here. A bit about my work and what I do. So, gosh, I mean, there's so much to say, but I have little notes here because my brain can be a little bit woo-woo sometimes, too much. So I might refer to them a little bit. But generally, I've been doing this spiritual work, I would say, for all of my life. I mean, I had deep, dark night of the soul stuff starting at 7 years old, feeling suicidal. I was in the hospital at 5 years old. I mean, it's just been one thing after another after another. People have been talking about Pluto and, the power of Pluto, especially now because there seems to be some conjecture about where Pluto really is. And I know we're going to get into that today, but it's definitely been a big part of my life. I have Scorpio rising, which is the sign that Pluto is connected with. And then I also have Saturn in Scorpio right next to my Pluto. And that's all right there, very close to my ascendant. So it's been one transformational experience after another, pretty much. And finding the power and the transformation of that. It started for me, especially in teenage years, when, teenage years are always hard for everybody. And that's Saturn, half a turn, right? So there's that rebelling against authority, which I was always really good at, but had no idea about the spiritual stuff really until starting to work with it then. And then I began my yoga journey shortly after. 15 years old, I happened to be blessed enough to have my first yoga class. And it started me on the path of balance and learning how to create and generate an inner balance through that practice. And I went through a lot of different soul searching over the years, but eventually I realized that I wanted to become a yoga teacher professionally, that was something that I really believed in and I saw the benefit of, and wanted to support others in walking a similar path because it was really helping me come to terms with all those difficult experiences from my formative years. I was even a MyLabs survivor. I didn't even know this until after 30 when they say you start to get these memories. So there's a lot of stuff bubbling up. I mean, even volcanic from my subconscious that had to be dealt with. And so it had a lot of challenges for me. I developed fourth-stage Hodgkin's lymphoma by the time that I was 30, and I discovered it by myself in the same way that I discovered my ADHD, and then they went and diagnosed me and proved me right. Well, the same thing happened here, although that story about the medical system there is a much longer one I'm not going to get into now. But I will say that it gave me the opportunity to really discover and begin to walk the path of mastery on holistic healing and understanding what healing really is, and that it's totally psychological and spiritual and holistic. It's integral. So it's not just, oh, take this pill and your problems will be solved. It's like, well, what's underneath all of that? What's at the core? And that's where Pluto and the depths of Scorpio really come in handy, and getting into the emotional process. So one of the greatest gifts that I've learned through this path is the value of the feminine and the powers of the divine feminine when it comes to healing and feeling in the body, feeling emotions. I have a pretty powerfully feminine influence chart. My Venus is retrograde right on my midheaven, and then I have Moon, Jupiter, Uranus conjunct, right? So for people who don't know too much about the astrological stuff, Venus is the relationship to the feminine, and then the moon is also the mother and our needs and our nurturance and our emotions. So I've had a very challenging life being a strong man who's also a sensitive man in touch with his feminine side, and learning how to integrate those two in a society that says you must only be one way and otherwise, ostracized, etc. Right. So that had a lot to do with reclaiming my healing and becoming an authentic person. So that was a big part of healing cancer. And I did so naturally through diet, meditation, and holistic practices, because I got to the root cause, because I got to the emotions that were underneath. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm perfect and I don't have any other health challenges. They have still persisted. It's a very, generally speaking, unhealthy world and society that we're all living in. So my story is not just my story. I've worked with many clients since this, just helping them deal with the same, and one thing that I never saw that I thought would I see is how much this relates to narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder and the ego, essentially, right? And that's what yoga talks about. The whole purpose of yoga is to dissolve the ego. And so, I've been writing this book. It's almost done. It's been taking quite a long time because I also have to get out of my own ego in order to really do that. And, my ego is not the softest one around. So, but it is coming along really nicely. It's about to be complete. And I have just a little short quote from it I'd like to read because I feel like it really connects well with the topic that we're having today about Pluto and Aquarius. And so this is actually from one of the subchapters in the Scorpio chapter of the book. So it's the Pluto and Aquarius chapter. And so it says, the spiritual evolution of the soul naturally leads to the conclusion that all beings are equal and sovereign and divine. But this cannot be forced upon or chosen for another. And so honoring the free will of others is one of the cornerstones of this divine free will sovereignty. Those who seek to control the world from their own fear will end up enslaved to themselves and their lowest possible expression. Fear consumes and love grows. And when we all allow that light that shines in our soul to know that we see it and choose it, that spiritual true potential will show.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
sharing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow, what an incredible group we have. We're going to start with Daniel. He's going to help us to understand why we choose to work with the Western chart. There's so many different systems, and yeah, why do we choose Western? And what are the other systems in your eyes? Like, how do they relate to the Western? And it's not like choosing one over the other. You're like all about integrating and just understanding the relationship between all of them. But as we see, all of us here are Western astrologers. Can you help us to understand what that system means?
Surely. This has actually been one of the foundational features of the research that I've done in my life, and it's cornerstone of how we look at charts in the Turning of the Ages Mystery School. And I'm just going to have to just take a moment and go back around 500, 600 BC, because at that particular time period, the majority of the astrology or cosmology systems was based on the constellations. And so basically the Sumerian approach, the Babylonian approach were constellations, and they would project onto the constellations usually seasonal features. So basically you would have the Scorpion constellation to the Sumerians. It's because the Scorpions were on the land at that time of year. But what happened was around 600 BC, the noticing was that the constellations were showing up at the wrong time of year. So the brilliance of the Hellenistic culture was to say we need a different framework. And so they came up with a framework that was based upon solstices and equinoxes. So it was really an Earth zodiac based on solstices and equinoxes. And up until 200 or 300 AD, there was an awareness in the mystery schools that both systems, there were separate systems. So you would have the constellations that would represent certain things. And do understand that different cultures will project different stories onto the same constellational groups. So that you don't want to get caught up in what's only going to be the way the Greeks saw the star groups. But there was still like an essence of that pattern. Steiner referred to it as the bones, the actual, our senses will see a certain constellational pattern, and it will have a meaningful framework from which the stellar energies come through. Meanwhile, there's an Earth zodiac, and it's really a brilliant thing, the tropical zodiac, which actually works together with the star groups. One of our members of our school, Gemini Brett, actually did the cosmology celestial mechanics research on to explain why the tropical zodiac works in both hemispheres, northern and southern hemisphere, which is because the Earth in its orbit is always pointed north. So basically, if you take away the seasonal framework on it, and just stick with the archetypes and stick with the constellations and stick with the orientation of the Earth, the tropical zodiac will work on anywhere on the planet. But the connection between the star groups and the signs is a thing that's shifting, so that in 26,000 years in the precessional cycle, so that every constellational group will have a chance to be with each sign. I mean, that's actually why the age of Taurus is called the age of Taurus, because at that time period, at the time period of the spring equinox, which we would say is the sign Aries, the bull is behind that. And then basically in the Aries age, the constellation, the Sumerians didn't call it a ram, they called it an indentured servant, a field hand, would be behind the time period from the spring equinox, right? And so then in the age of Pisces, you have you have basically the fish there behind the what we would call the sign of Aries. So over a period of time, every constellation has a chance to be with every sign. What we determined, and it all came from a book called, it started out with a book called Hamlet's Mill. Came out in 1969, and most of the astrologers of my generation were highly influenced by that book. And that was the very first time there was the mention that there would be a point where the galactic equator and the plane of the solar system would intersect with the solstices. And so that center point of that was in May of 1998. I actually did the communication with the astronomer who did the calculations. So we we basically look at the Great Turning, the end and the beginning of a 26,000 year cycle, as being from 1962 to 2034. And that is due to 1 degree every 72 years in the 26,000 year cycle. Back in the beginning of the 1900s, and through the work of Steiner and other people, it was considered at that point that the archetypal lifespan of a human being was 72, and based on that 1 degree portion of the 360. So we've recognized in our cosmology that the actual point of the beginning of the so-called age of Aquarius, or would also be the other 3, not just Aquarius, but also where each of the points, The 4 points are shifting. So you have the beginning of the age of Taurus, the beginning of the age of Leo, the beginning of the age of Aquarius, not based on the sign, but based on the constellation. So it's the water bearer that's lining up with the spring equinox point, and we recognize that as being May 1998. So that's when all the ages shifted at that particular point. And on the basis of the research that we've done, there's at least 50 different time periods of dates that people have come up with, which would be the beginning of the age of Aquarius. In fact, there's a whole library that I was in once. Books were written in the 1920s, all saying it's the new age, the beginning of the age of Aquarius. In 1962, 7 planets were conjunct in February in Aquarius. And so all the older astrologers then would say that was the beginning of the age of Aquarius. But I think we solved the puzzle on it by having a bigger framework, the galactic plane and the solar system plane, where they cross in the sky. And so the center point of that was actually May 1998. We're obviously still in the zone. We're in the great turning zone, which you can come up with different numbers, but the way we did the 1 degree every 72 years. So, but anyway, back to the thing about why do we use the tropical? Well, because the majority of the world knows those names and knows, rather, if you tried to do the constellations, I mean, for you, Adam, who know all the all the different systems of Vedic astrology, right? They're not even using the constellations. They're still cutting them in 30-degree segments. So you have a long constellation like the Priestess constellation, it's called Virgo. It's 45 degrees. So they need to cut it into these 30-degree portions. There is an entirely different type of astrology called constellational astrology, but then the whole issue is, what constellations are you going to use? Because the Chinese have a completely different conception. They project different things onto the star group. So our solution to the puzzle is that there are these constellational patterns that our senses do relate to, emblazoned in our karmic memories. Coming through that structure that we see are the stellar energies coming through. So you have the celestial energies coming through, and then the tropical zodiac would actually then be the Earth zodiac, and it's actually based on the reality of the Earth itself, and it's really fixed. It's fixed to the solstices and equinoxes, and then you have the moving, changing based on the precessional cycles of the different constellations with the different signs. This solves an additional problem, and that is that the meaning of the signs do slightly change depending upon what constellation is lining up with. Like in my own case, I'll just give a personal example. When I have Libra rising, the star that was rising at my birth was the star Spica, right smack in the middle of the Virgin Priestess constellation. Now, this is, so basically there is the transmission coming into Libra at this point that comes directly from her, from the Virgin Priestess constellation. And that has a really major part in my own life. I have Venus in Virgo conjunct Saturn, but anyway, it's like from the very beginning, when I was a little boy, traveling around the world, the first thing I wanted to know was, where are the matrilineal people here? Where are the cultures that were feminine based? And it's hard to find them in these days. And this then was one last point I'll make on this. Based on my own teachers and research I've done, it's only in Kali Yuga that patriarchy even exists. It's one of the symbols for Kali Yuga. Only there patriarchy happens. Every other time period in history, human beings are matrilineal. I don't mean matriarchal, but more of a partnership, collaborative situation of men and women equal to each other, and different. But that's all. Again, it's just another example of how things change based upon the precessional cycles and the yugas. So it's the transmission that comes from the constellation to the sign. The proof of this is, well, basically, I gave you the little backstory on it. But this brings us around to like the sidereal astrologers. Well, Pluto is not into Aquarius until whatever framework they're using, and they can come up with different dates on it depending on how they cut the sky. I basically believe that the movement of these planets into different signs, if we are willing to look at signs differently, and not just to base our view of the sign because it was written that way 2,000 years ago. Because now Aquarius is different than it used to be. Taurus is different than it used to be. Aries is different than it used to be. So Pluto moving into a sign, if we're able to accept that there's a different transmission coming into the sign, into the earth, then the symbolism works marvelously well. So it has come to my attention that there are some young astrologers out there that are saying, oh, Pluto into Aquarius is the beginning of the age of Aquarius. I would completely disagree with that, because Pluto moving into a sign is saying what needs to be composted in that sign. Where is the shadow of that sign? Sure, out of the composting comes new life, of course, but the composting and the annihilation and the breaking down of what needs to be broken down has to come first.
Oh yeah. Right. So when people say Pluto moving into Aquarius, like in 2040, that in the Vedic system, that's just.
Well, they're defined. There's different ages, different, even in Western astronomy. Based on the travesty that happened in 1930, when this international body called the IAU, the same ones that demoted Pluto, are the ones that defined the sky. They boxed it up into 88 groups. And even astrologers have bought into that whole thing that they did. And they took away what was so important about the way the ancients saw the sky, which was the space between the star groups, like the space between notes when you do music. It's like often the spaces in between are more important. If you ever see the 88 constellations, it's a travesty. And you want to hear a little secret here? They purposely, in order to mess with astrologers, they put a little piece of Ophiuchus along the ecliptic. They said, let's mess with the astrologers. We're going to have 13 signs. And I'm telling you that they did that on purpose. It was to actually mess with the astrologers. And that happened in 1930, so it's very, very intriguing to discover the backstories on this stuff.
I do resonate with Ophiuchus just because the ether element is an element. We have earth, air, fire, water. All the constellations have a element connected to it. But when we look at the pentagram, there is the ether element. So
of course. Yeah. So I'm not just saying that Ophiuchus is not important. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that it's not one of the 12. The 12 is really important. That's all I'm saying. And so so Ophiuchus is hugely important. It's the opposite of Orion, and it's associated with the Golden Gate and the Silver Gate, and the whole journey of the soul up the Milky Way. It's very super important, but it's just not one of the 12.
Right. Gosh, you have such a vast amount of knowledge on astrology. It's just incredible.
Laura, may I jump in and say something?
Yeah. So anybody go for it.
I just felt inspired. So I just wanted to note that Daniel is actually the Pluto and Leo generation. And so we're now entering the opposite of that. So we're going to be looking at the difference between the Leo and the Aquarius. And I think that there's something really interesting, because I'm seeing a lot of that on social media too, which is a part of our current culture, is that people get these little snippets of information. They haven't put in the time, they don't have the substance. And so they're pointing their apps. They got an app and they're pointing it up at the sky. and it looks like Pluto's not an Aquarius because they're looking at the constellations and they don't know the difference.
Right.
And so they're making this assumption, it's kind of like, can't you see where Pluto really is? I've seen so many posts like that. And, talking about humility, one of the shadows of Leo is, and Aquarius has that like arrogance kind of shadow to it. So I think that's kind of interesting. And then just thinking about honoring all the elders, it's like, if that position of like, oh, it's all wrong, then you really erase all the lineages and all the astrologers that have come before that have really laid the groundwork, laid the substance. Like there's this whole wealth of a lineage waiting to be inherited for those of us that are I think this is a lot of younger people or a lot of people that are new, and they could be inheriting that instead of deciding something else. So I think that it's really important to link with the wisdom of those that have been using these systems for years, and not to make it a competition, because I see that
Right.
many systems work in different ways. That it's when we really start to go down rabbit holes about reality and what is the matrix, it's like, yeah, it gets pretty trippy, yet these systems do work. And to honor those that have put in the time, and honor the elders who have studied to bring wisdom forth from these systems. So I think that's pretty cool that Daniel's representing the Pluto and Leo generation.
Well, but Sasha, if I might just interact on that, that what I've seen about this emphasis on Aquarius is completely moving it into the collective aspect of it. As a Pluto in Leo generation, when we were all into the glamour of the age of Aquarius back in the 60s, we remembered, we included the resonant polarity. So you cannot have the Borg collectivity, the shadow of Aquarius, without the sovereignty of the self. The sovereignty, obviously, you're right, Pluto in Leo has its shadow. And in fact, I have a whole presentation I do on what is the shadow of each generation. The Pluto and Sag generation, the Pluto and Leo generation, the me generation of Pluto and Leo. My God, if we had social media in the 60s, we would be worse than the current time period. So I'm well aware of the shadow of it. But what I'm saying is that without the sovereignty of the individual, without that, every spiritual teacher worth their salt has always said that evolution happens through the individual, not the collective. So it's based upon the sovereignty of the self, and that's Leo. And that works together. If you don't have them together, then Aquarius ends up becoming the egregore. It becomes the mob.
And that's what I love about the nodes, because it really shows that the soul trajectory wants to integrate polarity. It comes in with the south node, but it seeks the north node. It is pulled to its opposite to integrate. And then in that integration, wholeness is possible. And it's just wild. Just how our soul knows that, and it pulls us out of the duality and all the mind control. And I know we're gonna maybe get into this a little bit later, but like the mind control aspects that one sees in the chart connected to like maybe Saturn or even Chiron, like between Uranus and Saturn, been really delving into that a lot, and the dissolving of that as we shift into Pluto into Aquarius, and that shadow side just really dissolving the hooks of tyranny and conditioning and mind control and ancestral patterns that have been limiting.
Yep.
And then the shadow. I just love how you put it, everything, and thank you so much as well, Sasha, for what you just shared. Did either one of you have any comments on that before we move on to the next thing?
I'll just make one. Oh, sorry, them. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I'd love to hear what you would say. I just want to, just as you were sharing, Daniel, I think this comes from your school, but just the idea that you said we inform the mysteries just as much as they inform us, where you were talking about that, Aquarius, all the signs are evolving over time, that as individuals and the collective, we are actually also supporting that evolution.
Yeah.
Signs.
It's just a reciprocity, as above, so below, as within, so without. I just wanted to say one quick thing to Sasha, which is that I think that um, one of the motivations I had in trying to synthesize the two systems was to get beyond the competition, only the surrealists are right, tropical, they don't know what they're talking about. And then there's certain constellational people, but so basically it's a way of synthesizing this knowledge that includes even going all the way back. And the thing I really love about the ancient Vedic system, they didn't even start with the signs. They got the signs from the Greeks. That's the truth. That came 200 BC. What they had was the lunar mansions. And the lunar mansions are beautiful because if you go farther back, it was the movement of the moon each night that gave them their map. That the earliest zodiacs were lunar mansion zodiacs, even before that became signs based upon the sun and things like that. So I really love honoring all the different traditions that can be woven together in a package that can make sense today. But more than anything, it does explain a lot of what's happening. But no, more important, does it really help people? Does it enable a person to actually be in alignment with why they were born?
Yeah, definitely. So Sasha, you were talking a bit about this Venus archetype and Pluto, Persephone and Hades, and just this journey of reclamation of self-sovereignty and empowerment. And where do you want to take us with that? But
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say that I learned about the Venus cycle after I actually watched Venus and the Sun in 2012. I watched Venus track across the Sun. Some consider that a kind of an eclipse of sorts, very special, only happened 2 times in our lifetime, 2004 and 2012. And I actually learned about that synodic cycle from a student of Daniel's. I didn't actually know Daniel's actually done legendary work about the Venus cycle and all the synodic cycles in his mystery school. So I got to connect with his work later. But in the process of learning about this and really not just learning about it intellectually, but when I had that moment, I had this embodied transmission. It was like I went to sleep, I had a dream. And in that dream, I was making love to this man. And it was this combination of like the most red hot erotic energy with the sweetest, most broken, open heart energy. And I woke up and I was like, oh, that was Venus conjunct the sun. It was like this kind of like union energy that was very palpable and available for our own wholeness, like you were talking about, Laura, that it's actually happening inside of us. And it was that inspiration that really helped me to follow my path as an entrepreneur and leave the dead end of teaching and go into this other path. So I really followed the Venus cycle for my own path of transformation. And that is my theory. My working theory is that when we take that journey consciously, when I say the heroine's journey, Venus being the feminine and representing our inner nature of sensations, but as well our feelings and that place in our heart where we really connect into the vaster knowledge, whatever you call that, God or source or whatever you want to call that. But how do we discover the truth of who we are? And then how do we awaken? And for those of us that have been on the path, the path of the truther, we know if we look at ourselves from 5 years ago, whoa, like we never would have imagined where we are now, as far as like who we identified at, what we believed, what we thought was happening. And so there's this like beautiful process of saying yes to that process of consciously undoing who we've been to show up to the truth of who we are now, and to be able to look at some of the harder things that are pretty mind-blowing about this reality that we thought were true that were not. So as I started syncing with this Venus cycle, every 19 months, there would be a new theme depending on where Venus and the sun met. That theme was really like the invitation for the heroine's journey. And I saw that there was these repeating patterns, and I started to study Ariel Gutman's work and really looking at how these places where Venus and the sun meet, the Venus star points, actually move backwards through the zodiac and have a range of over 100 years. And so, for example, the current Venus star that we're in, this Venus and Leo cycle, that came in the late 80s for the first time. And so every 8 years, we're getting this re-inspiration of how do we go on a heroine's journey based on the theme of Leo, of our creative inspiration, of our creative power. And we could riff on it a bunch of different ways. I bet every astrologer here would have a different interpretation of what that could mean. And so that really made me realize on an astrological level that these ways that Venus moves in a much longer cycle, where she's in this pattern where she's conjuncting the sun in the same sign over 100 years, it really gives her more of that long-term transformational energy, like we tend to think of as Pluto having that energy, right? Because it's slow moving. So it gives this very inner planet, very personal, very intimate planet, this longer, more transformational kind of energy. And it really has inspired me to think deeply about both the original Sumerian myth of Inanna, where she's choosing to go down to the underworld to visit her dark sister. So we have the topside feminine and the underworld feminine, who's really in this hell realm, and Inanna goes down, and there's a connection between that sense of I'm the queen of heaven, I can do whatever I want, and then going into the hell realm and having a transformational experience and coming back out. That's Pluto, the hell realm. That's the Resh Gogol is in the hell realm. We could even say she's like the earliest Plutonian kind of figure in that way. She's living there in this place of limitation and loss and grief and not having a super fun topside experience. And then later on with the Greeks, we have the myth of Demeter and Persephone, which then splits that topside feminine into two, the mother and daughter. And then we have Hades coming up when Persephone or Kore is out in the field, picking her flowers, and actually sees what is it called? I want to say the narcissist flower. It's not a narcissist flower. The flower that, has that connection to that word. You know what I'm talking about. And then she gets, which I think is really interesting. I've thought a lot about that. And, what does narcissism have to do with getting snatched into these kind of underworld experiences, especially with social media, when you see, these young ones and they're just taking pictures of themselves and they're so sucked into this image of me. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And then they get taken into this dark realm of social, being online and being exposed to a lot of negativity, a lot of things that their little psyches are not meant for. And so then there's that kind of process again, where Hades is Pluto and Venus is Persephone. And I, just think about all the ways in our culture that this patriarchal culture, as Daniel was talking about, doesn't protect the innocent, that we haven't protected the young. We haven't made that kind of fierce boundary. And as a mother, I see a lot of the ways that we really have our child taken away from us by this culture. And so it's been a very, very deep contemplation for me, and keep coming back to the heroine's journey, that no matter what life is dishing us out, no matter how much we have those trials and tribulations, of wanting to create a more beautiful world and everything that gets in the way. And we go into those hell realms where, I would say that, C-sections and shared, custody, where kids have to go back and forth, and all of these things that happen around our children, and it is a part of that rift. But we can come into this place where we're really fortifying our power no matter what's happening. We're coming back to that heart center. And so, yeah, just kind of wanting to weave in some inquiry about, how the Venus cycle kind of connects as we're talking about Pluto. And this particular cycle is a Venus and Leo cycle that started last August. And so it's interesting because it's the opposite of the Pluto going into Aquarius, right? So there we have that Pluto being in Aquarius and Venus being in Leo. And if Pluto in Aquarius is going to be revealing the shadows of Aquarius, the dystopian police state, the AI, the surveillance, it feels like Venus in that cycle can really help us bring in the heart-centeredness, bring in the collaboration between people, because it's about relationship. So today Venus is actually with Pluto in the sky in Aquarius, because she's moved on from that point where the cycle started. She's moving about every 4 weeks through different signs, but that overarching energy of the heart, I think, is going to be really important as we go deeper into this Aquarian energies and the shadow of it, and how that can play out where we lose our humanity, we lose that sense of connection, and people are getting so enchanted into that online world that it feels like that energy and that spirit of the Leo energy for this cycle, in particular, it will be different for the next cycle, but that we can really work with that in looking at the astrological themes. Oh. So the last thing I'll say, and then I'll leave it at that, but there's one more exact opposition that happens August 27th. So Venus in this Leo cycle has actually been opposing Leo, and the last one will be August 27th of 2025, with Venus being at the very early degrees. I can't remember exactly what this is, but we've got, 1 degree and 1 degree. And I feel like it's this cosmic reminder that heart-centeredness, that sense of connection, that way that we really bring the relational in to find our collaborators who want to create new paradigms, is a big antidote to everything we're about to talk about. Because I know we're going to get into the guts of, the Pluto and Aquarius energies.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I know Daniel wants to say something just real quick. And I love that, just looking at the different archetypes throughout history and that vulnerability and naivety that also faces the harshness of this world, that gets dragged into that underworld. But then once it realizes the creative cauldron of creation and it's a place to, rebirth, that crone, who finds the light in the dark, is able to emerge. And it seems, in some of the mythology that the crone or the Hecate was like a guide in that process. And that's the maiden mother crone, triple goddess. To me is very much, the Venus cycle of moving from, maiden to like the crone being initiated through the underworld back, to the mother, and just how the cycle kind of happens. It's like to get out, you have to find wisdom. You have to find the light within. Nobody's going to come and save you. And that's the most important thing that we realize now, as we shift into Pluto and Aquarius, like no ET race. And like, if you keep looking outside yourself, that's all dissolving. It's a lot more about the accountability within the self and finding that lantern, of wisdom to be a much more mature humanity. Like we're grown up, we're not looking to false parents, and making excuses for them, and realizing, that dependency bond was really unhealthy and dysfunctional to begin with. And that self-reliance is what we need before we can really find true love. We have to have some self-worth first. So, what are your thoughts, Daniel? And then, Adam.
I had a couple just quick points to follow up on this. One is that the Venus-Pluto conjunction is exactly the same degree minute as the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that happened at 022 Aquarius back in 2020, which I thought was just really a wild thing. I just wrote up something about that. The second thing is that actually in our school, we don't even look at Pluto as being masculine. Actually, I don't agree that when the Zeus cult took over and they allocated the world to the three brothers, that totally shifted an understanding of what a Plutonian initiation actually originally was. So that is you mentioned. I mean, it's basically the so-called dark goddesses, whether including Ereshkigal, which I think is a matriarchal, matrilineal version of Pluto, and Hecate, Kali, Durga, and so on. The only other thing I wanted to mention is that since this is a topic very dear to my heart, from the stuff I did back in the 90s, in the original research that I did on the Venus cycle in Samaria, the journey began, and it was only every 8 years they did it, and it began at the March equinox when Venus rose as a morning star at the closest to the March equinox. But here's the thing people forget about: the reason for her journey. And this is so important for now with the Venus cycle. The reason for her journey was to grieve the previous age. She went to attend to the funeral of the great bull of heaven, and that represented the ending of the age of Taurus. Now, can you imagine? That's a hell of a lot to grieve. You're grieving the entire matrilineal time period as the patriarchal tribes are coming in. Now, today, look how much there is to grieve. I mean, even the individuals who are attached to materialism of Kali Yuga, they have to grieve the loss of that, right? And plus, we could say that there's so much else. I mean, men and women have identified themselves with the patriarchal systems, grieving that, letting go of that. And essentially, it's an even more major grieving thing that's happening when Venus goes into the underworld now. So I needed to bring that in because then it's the grieving often is part of a Plutonian initiation. When you basically surrender all of your attachments, even the annihilation of your ego, yourself, everything, you're stripped bare. And then you can grieve. The same thing the Native Americans knew when they would go into the Sundance. They did that for the people. So the Mars makes the same journey into the underworld, the same surrender into that place of stripped down, composting it all, and you come out serving the people. When you take away that element. So the grieving Plutonian aspect is really important. Thank you. Bringing
Yeah, and
I thought of
exciting. We're going to have Venus rising. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
We were talking about this. So I think you sent an email to me. We should have a seminar at some point on these different ways of looking at the Venus cycle.
Absolutely. That would be fabulous. And we will have Venus rising as the morning star this equinox because she's going to be entering an Aries cycle. So it's going to be that 8-year point he was talking about.
Which is what we see as the star point, actually.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, we got to have that extra geeking out on the Venus cycle. And I just wanted to say too, from what Laura said about Hecate, again, it feels like that message of connecting with the elder wisdom and not just having the current understanding be disconnected from all that's come before. So I think there's so much in that. And I'm so glad this is such a multi-generational group.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God.
I'd love to chime in if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Sharing Sasha around this connection between Pluto and Venus and Persephone and Hades. And it was also making me think when you were bringing in the wisdom of the Venus star points that in this current moment in time, we're in this kind of moment in time as in broader, these 8-year Venus cycles, we're in this transition between the Scorpio star points to the Libra star points, I believe. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we might have one more Venus-Sun conjunction in Scorpio. And then they're fully moving over to Libra. And although we're have one more Venus Sun conjunction in Scorpio. The Venus has already been rising in the Libra constellation. But when we think about this, to me, like this theme of for about 100 years, I don't know the exact, we've had these Venus Sun conjunctions or these Venus star points in the sign of Scorpio, which has this connection to Pluto. And now we're in this merging, shifting time over to the Venus star points and Libra. And to me, it just makes me intuitively sense, in this time over the last 100 years, at least, in our lifetime, there's been so much around power dynamics and relationships, and even kind of coming into the collective awareness, even in the spiritual, like this spiritual awareness that has been coming through around power dynamics and relationships. And I think that that's been to some degree those Venus star points in Scorpio, just kind of bringing that up to our awareness for transformation. And now with Venus moving into Libra as these star points, I sense not that I mean, when we look around, we can see there's still a lot more work to do around power dynamics and relationships and healing that. But I sense it's really going to support us making some really powerful personally and collectively transformation around how we're relating from others. And Scorpio is not just about like power dynamic issues in relationships, right? That would be the shadow side of Scorpio, is out of balance power and power over and manipulation, and there's other signs that have part of that as well. But the higher octave is when two people come together, that alchemical tantric energy of 1 + 1 = like infinity. And now as we're moving into Libra, I sense that it's going to support coming together in more collaborative, non-hierarchical relationships. So then we can maybe tap into that like more higher octave of the alchemical nature of Scorpio. I don't know if I'm like making any sense, but I'm just kind of like feeling inspired as I was hearing you share.
Absolutely. Yeah, gosh. That's why I always liken it to like this breakup with the old paradigm and false cities into just this true love. And go ahead, Daniel.
Just a quick point is if you use the star point slightly differently, it was the previous cycle that it went into Libra. So not the next one. It depends on whether you do the heliacal rise of Venus or not. So I just that's we can maybe reserve that for some interesting dynamic regarding looking more at Venus. But the whole overall theme of grieving Pluto and the power dynamics and all of this is beautiful. Thank you so much for bringing all this up. I really appreciate it.
I mean, and it's so interesting because when you see the planets and all the different alignments happening and what's happened to our DNA and the hierogamic union and sacred union and this sort of patriarchal programming that has impacted so many generations for thousands of years, how this integration of polarity and coming together, this alchemical shift is really just, what these growth periods are all about, to restore. It's just amazing. And so when I look at like dark Saturn, I just see it as that, tyrannical control force or a narcissistic partner or a control freak that you're with, or just that imbalance, all the dynamics that we have in relationships that just are codependency bonds, or a narcissist and an empath, or just a patriarchal, and it's just all the different stereotypes and programmings that we've gone through for so many generations. It's just amazing to see just how the outer planets, guide us and initiate us back into the divine masculine and feminine, the electric magnetic energies of that, and how the outer planets are the great initiators. What are your thoughts on that? Like, I don't know if you wanted to share anything, Adam, before we move on to the next topic, but I wanted to talk to you guys about the outer planets being the great initiators and how they are suppressed in our society and hijacked so that we have mental disorders. And like, when you're going through a plutonic thing and you go into the dark night of the soul, it's something to be ashamed of. You don't create the space for it. When Uranus comes in, instead of appreciating the downloads or speaking up and saying what your truth is, you're silenced, or you have anxiety attacks because it's been, internalize, and how all these medical conditions are actually like the dark Saturn tyrannical system's way of squashing these growth periods and initiations back into the fullness of what our expression can be. And I'd love to get into that, but I'm sorry, I just had to say that after what we just talked about. Adam, what are your thoughts about what's been shared so far?
Yeah, that's great. Actually, perfect segue into this conversation around Venus, and I just love her presence in this conversation and everyone in this group. And I think the hidden power of it, right? Because the feminine deals with the hidden. It's the water undersea, the surface. You might not be able to see what's happening, and emotions are the same, right? Like someone could have no expression on their face, but have emotional turmoil underneath, and you would never know. So there's this hidden element of the feminine that can show up and the hidden mystery, or the power and the wisdom in that. But I've been reading your book lately, as you know, just kind of devouring it on this crazy long train ride I had through India recently, and I was really struck by your words about how Venus is a part of this new coming age, and really ushering that in. And so I guess I want to just like frame a quick question to the group, because there's everybody really is like sharing such beautiful things on
What book are you talking about?
Oh, your book,
Oh, my book.
your Awakening to the Truth Frequency book.
Oh.
Because you talked about how, it's really about this love story, and how Venus is bringing in and ushering in this new age of Aquarius. And so I kind of wanted to hear Sasha's and Jaime's and everyone's thoughts on that connection. I don't know if anyone else has read your book or read that line in your book, but I definitely wanted to hear your perspective on it too, like how you see that bringing in the age of Ophiuchus. It was specifically, I think you mentioned, right?
Right. Yeah, just I feel like it's a reunion, a love story. I feel like everything that we're going through on a human level is a return to, true love, the true love with creation. Everything is about relationship. And if we're in relationship with the system, how is it treating us? Well, it's been abusive, it's been deceptive, it's been controlling, it's everything that you wouldn't want in a partner. But it looks okay. It cares about us, but it manipulates, it tricks us, it plays on our fears, it plays on our dreams, and it leads us astray. And we all go through that in our relationship world, and relationship life. So on a micro level, we're going through it, all the time. And we know how to heal the planet by just knowing how to heal ourselves in our own lives when we survive a divorce or a toxic relationship or addiction, and we overcome that, or a lot of the turmoil of childhood and all the beauty and joy of it as well that we want to, capture. Sorry, didn't mean to. Yeah. So this the planetary system just knowing how to heal itself is God having its own experience, in this. It's just wild to watch how we're healing alongside this planetary system that's recovering from the invasion of like the Anunnaki and these exploded planets, and this, trauma with the star seeds, coming in, and just how everything is, working together, the 7 root races, 5 cloister races, and star seeds to like rebuild this template of something that's been so shattered, like this, almost like this broken heart of this relationship, that's finding itself again. The Christ Sophia like reunion, where the tyrannical dark forces, king of tyranny and patriarchy, and all of the dysfunctions between the masculine and feminine for so many thousands of years that, it's like we're in relationship therapy through these planetary alignments in our own lives, until it's like we can come together as a humanity and be like, we're united, we're in balance, we're in love, and we're integrated, and we're whole, and everything like is bringing us back to that true love story of just union. But it's also mother father, who births, the children that come and grow up and hold the template of, the love story to then produce children to be the mother father principle, the restoration of the tree of life. So that's all I'm going to say on that. I don't know.
I love that you wrote that, Laura. I didn't know. I haven't read your book yet, but now it's definitely top of my pile. And for me, when we talk about Venus, it really connects to creating a culture of care. And we can really see how that has been missing in so many ways. And so it's just that act of caring that it will guide us when we care about each other, when we take care of each other, when we build these networks of care. We can actually begin to see new paradigm projects and what the world that we want to live in, because we know that the dark forces work off of networks. They're these horrible networks. They're horrific. And so it's like we're creating new networks through our visionary ideas of what we want to have happen, but through actual, like you were talking about, Adam, like that felt sense of care. Because I think we can tell if somebody seems okay, but inside they're in some kind of emotional turmoil. It's like that incoherence, right? Like those of us that are intuitive can tell something's off. Like that's the gut, right? But many don't, we just look at the mask. But I was thinking about this Plutonian journey and what you're saying about really leading the way, Venus, the heart leading the way. And I've been listening to survivor Allie Carter, who came out to really say, she's been speaking for years. I had never heard of her until recently, but she was in the Diddy parties. And it's like, it takes a lot of resourcing to be able to listen to this kind of horrific underworld abuse and stay in that care. And we're going to have to grieve, like Daniel was saying, like that these things have even happened to children on our watch, in our world. And it's like her mom is saying, like that's the lowest common denominator for humanity, which Pluto and Aquarius is going to show us what's needed to wake up to the spirit of humanity working towards the golden age. The lowest common denominator is we do not allow children to be tortured. We stop it. And so I feel like she really came in as this voice that's speaking to that, because she's been speaking up for a long time, and there's a lot of people that can't care. They're too shut down. They can't hear it. They brush it off. So I think there's something about that, and those that have been through these horrific experiences and come out the other side to be of service and to share their stories is quite extraordinary.
Wow, I'm so, so glad you brought that up. That is so huge. And that is just so much the healing process, and I love what you just said about, those that are just repelled by it. It's so heartbreaking that it's just, you can't even go there, but when we can just enter that wound, and just bring in that unconditional love and drop the ego and that Hollywood and all the facades of every power structure and pillar of society that is upholding the status quo or just what has been established, hiding all these things, once those individuals are able to say, that's not important anymore, this is, let's turn our attention on this, then, it can really begin to address, that the depth of how far this all goes with somebody like her and so many others. It's just
I'll just say one more thing, and then I'll let others jump in. But I keep thinking about with this power of empathy and that story of Anana's descent, and the whole key to that story, the whole key to the liberation, the whole key to Anana's resurrection is when those little beings, the food and water of life, they come down into the underworld, into the horror place, into Ereshkigal's realm where she's grieving and she's in a world of hurt, and they simply say, oh, your heart, it hurts, it hurts. Oh, your belly, it hurts, it hurts. They don't give advice. They don't turn away. They don't say, oh yeah, I was there last week. And that's, they don't do that. All the moves that we make with each other when someone's in pain, when they're in that Plutonian underworld, it's like the art of empathy to me feels like it's so important to create for that humanity awakening that we're wanting with this new age.
Yes, definitely. So powerful. Yeah. It's going to be very, very intense transition. It's a rehabilitation of humanity, really, and we're all called within ourselves to just answer to what we came here for. I mean, we all have missions. We nature is encoded with the medicine. And that's the thing. It's like adversity and disease brings us closer to ourselves, and that's why I love astrology, because you get to know the roots, and why this is happening. Everything on the world stage that's in disarray and chaos and conflict and war and, the health of this planet. It's like now we're looking at the roots, what is underneath it all that needs to come to the surface to be healed. And Chiron is just like such a powerful planet, like it being an asteroid, like it's amazing. Yeah, the impact that Chiron has. When I read charts and I look at the Chiron in my chart, it's like the wounds, and like Tiamat and the explosion of all that, and like, just trauma, and like where Chiron shows up. Like there's Chiron's been squaring Pluto, and just your story, Adam, the healing journey where, just the toxicity, the poisons, the pain, and how that turns to purpose, how that turns to wisdom, how that turns to healing, and the healing journey, it's really powerful. With Chiron being in Aries in the North Node, it's like the wounds of humanity on an ego level are needing to be addressed. And the way we handle it, is like out on the table. Like someone to avoid, someone to hurt others, someone to be in just that, like, everybody's just wrestling over like, wounds. And some are like, you know what, we're gonna, take charge and we're gonna heal this. We're gonna be the guides to move this into the new direction, a better direction. And then you got the ones that have been in the medical industries that have been compromised because of pandemic, who are wounded by, what am I supposed to do here? They're asking me to make people do something that might not be the best decision to make. So it's really interesting to see how Chiron, being so close to Aries and the nodes in the last bunch. Yeah, Daniel, can you talk to us about that? It's just, this healing of Mars, ego, identity.
Well, yes, if I could just say a few things about the Chiron placement and Chiron in Aries, but most importantly, that it's the fifth Chiron return on the United States chart right now. The way I understand Chiron, and I'll take this in two directions. One is that I believe it's not in any way a wounder. It's pointing out where the fracture point or the wound is. Okay. And so therefore it's bringing up to have to look at where the fracture points are. Now, so every time the United States has been in a Chiron return, they haven't gotten it. They just have not. They have not dealt with it, and it just keeps getting more and more severe. But then the second thing is, what about Chiron and Aries? This is part of the revision we see in the signs. So we've been stuck with Aries, the definition of Aries, based on the patriarchal Hellenistic culture. And so therefore we have like a whole thing combined with monotheistic religions. It used to be in the old days, Mars, Aries, was not let into the cities. He was out in the fields, games, sports, wild activity in the fields. This was not what it got turned into later, which was professional armies. So basically what happened, the hijack of Aries was turning it into like the Western idea of winning, killing, defeating, black, white hats, black hats, good guys, bad guys, and the whole thing. The transformation, the pointing out of that chironic wound of Aries, what can it shift to? Here's what I suggest, and I got this insight from one of my colleagues, Dale O'Brien. There is still the strength, the all-in commitment that is in the sign of Aries, no question. The suggestion is the strength of saying, I will not comply. I will not comply. You don't defeat the enemy. You don't, because basically that just perpetuates the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and the whole thing. It's been going on for way too long. I choose to not comply. And I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about, complying to what the cabal, the agenda, their whole game is to get people to consent. Will not consent. That is the transformation of why Chiron is in Aries. Okay, it's to say no to the old version of warfare. And if anything, you can go back to the way in which the pre-patriarchal cultures did war. It's called counting coup. So you would have the champion fight warrior or whatever, he would go into battle with someone else, touch them in a mortal spot. Over. You don't have to kill them. It becomes a sport, it becomes a game, which is really which is the competitive personal best aspect of Aries, not defeating, not good guys, bad guys, So that's my statement for Chiron and Aries. Will not comply. And there's a strength that takes that. It's sort of a Gandhi kind of approach, So.
Oh, I love it. That's awesome. Yeah, gosh. And then on its way to Taurus, all these shifts of some of the outer planets into new signs. Gosh, Uranus into Gemini and well, Chiron's not going to go into Taurus probably till 2026.
It stays in certain signs much longer than in other signs. So it stays the longest amount of time in Aries and Taurus.
Yeah. Adam, what was the questions that you had? There was a lot about the um narcissism and mental health and astrology and just you were sharing it earlier. I can't.
Oh, that's okay. I have it written down actually. It's a perfect segue too because we're talking about Chiron and Aries.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it's really well
Like
set up. Thank you.
recovering from that in a society that encourages that. I think, you know, the Chiron Aries to me also is like the wounds of these labels, the identification with these labels. Some labels like people feel like good about, where that they feel proud of that label, which is connected to a wound. And some it's like, they don't really want to carry it. It's just the whole wounding of identification that isn't authentic to what our truth really is, that we're recovering from, I feel. With this gender confusion, also like the wounding of that identity, the wounding of just gosh. I'm going to hand it over to you, though. I was just thinking that for a sec.
That's okay. Yeah, yeah. No, I love our riffs and the way your brain works. So it's really interesting, and I think this whole concept and conversation in our collective didn't really start to come up into everyone's forefront of thinking until Trump, because of just how much he can kind of, reflect or embody that archetype for some people at least, right? So in the zeitgeist, it was narcissist, narcissist, narcissist. Everyone started talking about narcissism. And this was around the time that Chiron went into Aries. So I don't see that as a coincidence as an astrologer. It just, strikes me really strongly. And I think your question about the identities and attaching to the wound, as an identity is such a pitfall that these dark systems really do their best to hook us into, because then we can crystallize ourselves from our own belief on who we are, and then they don't have to do anything to control us. We're doing the job for them. So it brings the question to my mind, it's like, what is everyone's thoughts in align with this Pluto and Aquarius era, where Aquarius has to deal with moving away from convention, breaking out of the norms, and things that are different or weird or revolutionary, right? And so, we're having everyone now is neurodivergent almost. It's like, oh, this is, and some people you're in pathologizing it. It's like, oh, like dancing spontaneously in the middle of the street must mean you're neurodivergent or whatever, right? So there's this identity that wants to come up, I think, breaking out of the mold of the old Capricornian way and, systems and that rigid structure. But I think it really brings to the surface this Aquarian archetype of the fine line between genius and insanity. And so, we're getting the upheaval, we're getting the shocks to our system, our psyche that are causing us to question what is real, what is reality, and how do I relate to it? How do I contribute to its manifestation, its creation? And at the same time, there's a lot of just like almost fanciful thinking, complete ungrounded, like disassociative, like, wow, just too woo woo. So it's like, how do we know what we're dealing with when we're dealing with the neurodivergence or the outside of the box thinking? And how does this relate to other forms of what some might even call neurodivergence, or just like different brain activity or different brain functions, like personality disorders, like narcissistic personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, CPTSD, right? Like all these labels or identities that people choose to take them on. I don't think we have to, but I think that's people's choice. Um, are indicating that there's this, alteration of consciousness that's really a part of the conversation too. And so I loved Sasha's point earlier about compassion and empathy being a fundamental component, generating that care for our society. I feel that very strongly. I've had recently some major dark nights of the souls over just the past few days. I'm amazed that I'm even this coherent on this call today. Thank goodness. But it's like, bringing that to people can be very difficult, and actually having it be received well in a way that supports the release and the healing of trauma rather than adding more onto it is also difficult and pretty difficult to find, it seems, generally in society these days, right? So I guess the question comes down to, in my mind, how do these different ways of thinking or mental mind realms in which we relate to each other in the world have to do with this Pluto and Aquarius field that we're finding ourselves exploring now? And how can that also connect to the Aquarius genius and mad scientist symbols, right? Psychopathy and the polar opposite of the pinnacle higher divine mind, where deprogramming and reprogramming the power and co-creative collective consciousness can thrive.
Wow. Yeah. Gosh. Any thoughts, anybody?
Well, I always do.
What were your thoughts about like this Gemini, Uranus, Gemini, Jupiter in Gemini retrograde, Mercury retrograde, right? It's like, and then Saturn square for quite some time. Is this like the tug of war going on with Saturn Pisces belief systems, rigidity? Like we still want to control your belief systems, because when Neptune and Saturn go into Aries at 0 degrees, right? Isn't that happening very soon?
Well,
Neptune, the Aries and Saturn, the divine mind and the multidimensional and the creative imagination is super opened up. And it looks like Saturn is just doing its best to infect as much as it can so that we generate exactly what they want. And like you said, Adam, we just end up doing it ourselves. They just have to just implant the thought in the program, and then we go and create it. And if we can purify that space and align with our higher visions and dreams, we can manifest something much more beautiful than the script they're handing us. But there's like this strong Saturn square. But what do you want to say, Daniel?
Well, I just wanted to go back to what his question was, which was about Pluto and Aquarius and how it would relate to what he was bringing forth. And if I could comment on that, would that work? Certainly, the Uranus moving into Gemini is important when we talk about the U.S. chart in particular, the Mars and Gemini aspect. But as regarding Pluto and Aquarius, Aquarius to me is a very, very curious sign, because on one hand, it has that revolutionary, different than normal aspect about it. Revolutionary in that sense, uniqueness, and certainly when I was learning about it in the 60s and 70s, it had to do with really be yourself, a complete uniqueness of the individual. And yet, it's also about the collectivity. And to me, the shadow of this whole situation is the creation of the monoculture through technology. Where basically everybody ends up, the only choice you're going to have is whether your avatar looks different than you. Otherwise it's like all the same, putting everybody into the same mold. Hollywood culture, so-called Western culture, monoculture around the whole planet. The elimination of individual cultures, or what Steiner referred to as the folk soul, individual groups that have their own realities, their own connection to the land in different ways. So to me, what's one of the things that we have to stand for with Pluto moving into Aquarius is to remember the importance of the individual and the uniqueness, and be your archetype. We can all be, and not to surrender into the sameness of the collectivity. To me, that is by far the greatest danger that happens as we move into the age of technocracy and technosis, and people addicted to a digital realm. That is the shadow of it. And so we have to remember the uniqueness and individuality. Be your own archetype, which is really what the vision we had in the late 60s, early 70s. Be your archetype. Don't be like everyone else. Be the one that you really are. And I don't see that this current wave of Aquarius actually recognizing that, without taking into account this whole shadow thing of surrendering into the egregore and the mob, and have everything be the same.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And just thinking about, we have this whole generation that basically has been handed that narcissist flower, has been handed those phones. Someone was making that analogy between the ring of power and those cell phones, and you get these phones around little kids and you can tell they get really weird. They start to act like the Gollum, give me, where is it, and I think that we didn't realize that. I didn't realize that. I definitely would have made a different choice around my own daughter. So we have this whole generation. I think it's very interesting that Gen X, a portion of them have their Chiron in Aquarius. And so it's like, we really need the knowledge of those that came before to how do I be myself? I go on Instagram and I'm 13 years old, and I'm looking at all these pictures of perfect other girls that probably aren't even, completely real. Maybe some of them, obviously there's, but they have some kind of beauty standard. I'm like, oh, I'm not good enough. Like, so the social media has really been a powerful tool to cut a whole generation off from confidence to be themselves. And so I feel like they need that mentorship. They need those experiences. They need those rites of passage. They need a way to be able to birth into being themselves, as well as us. And I would call that the heroine's journey of discovering who we really are, what our qualities are, what our gifts are, what our mission is, and then having the courage to show up and be the one. I mean, during COVID, I was the only parent at the board meeting it was over Zoom, because we couldn't actually go to the board meetings if we didn't get the jab. So I was the only parent that was there on Zoom advocating for them to stop making our teenagers wear masks, because one, it's ridiculous as far as efficacy, but two, it was so undermining for their self-esteem. And long after the mask mandate stopped, they would still wear masks because they didn't feel like they looked good enough. You have acne, you feel awkward, and they were hiding behind these masks. I mean, it just put such a huge pressure point into that developmental stage of adolescence and the insecurities that come with that. It was so cruel. But I was the only one in a school community of 2000 who is saying, this is wrong, let's stop.
That is really scary.
It's really scary. It was very scary. Yes. So we need to build those networks of support, to help our own selves shine in our uniqueness and show up in our gifts, but then also, reach to the elders that came before. So that wisdom, it's like the mycelium, right? That wisdom is in the ecosystem, and then help to let the newer generations understand that it's actually cool to be yourself and to be unique and to not care what others think. And I think the Chiron and Aries return people, shout out to Laura. We have a particular role right now. We're the new elders. Daniel's more in the like established elder realm. I don't know your exact age, Daniel, but I know you're a bit older. So you're in that, like, have you had your second Saturn return?
I'm 76.
Oh my goodness. So he looks so young. I would never know that, right?
Gosh.
So amazing.
What?
I just had my third Saturn opposition and my fourth nodal return.
So see, this is so vital.
Basically the powers that shouldn't be want to get rid of us as quickly as possible, quite frankly, because we remember what it was like. Hell, I go back to hand drawing my charts, I mean, I know what it was like before the thing happened,
Yeah, and Gen X is kind of the last generation that remembers that, a level of that. We didn't have phones. We just called each other. We just went. We have that in our bodies, and maybe some of the first millennials didn't have that tech influence. So I feel like that's our collective inspiration, is like, how do we help each individual find their gifts and be themselves and connect with wise beings like Daniel, who spent his whole life helping people find their purpose.
What I want to say is that I have such incredible gratitude that somehow that in our school and among my clientele, and maybe the bad sign of this is the fact that I don't have a real cross-section of people in America or the world. The great majority of the people I work with are awake or really want to be awake, so it's really great to be able to continually talk to people who you don't have to convince of anything, I mean, every now and then there's that conversation. Did you get the jab? but almost everyone that I work with are the ones that did not comply. And I'm just so grateful, to have a school like that, and to have clientele that are like that. And we just try to keep it one person at a time. We check in with each other. How are you doing? Or are you still you still holding? Because people feel very alone, the ones that have chosen not to comply. And so we have a network of individuals like that are. Whether they're my clients or not, my personal friends, we just check on in each other, with each other all the time. How are you doing? Are you still keeping up with what's going on? And then we can share stories about like, God, well, my brother now won't talk to me, or, whatever it might be. The bifurcations in families are just completely unbelievable. I could go on and on with personal stories about that. Anyway.
What do you guys? Yeah, that's amazing. What do you guys, you said bifurcation. What are your thoughts on like bifurcation when it comes to astrology? There's like the inverted sort of shadow trajectory of a possible timeline that the astrology would show, like people go down that road. And then there's the ascension path, right? There's definitely markers astrologically that show this is a time of awakening and ascension, but there's also markers that show how it could potentially be New World Order. How do you guys kind of like interpret like timelines and bifurcation in terms of astrology?
I'll just start off. I mean, I could just go on and on about this, but I know for sure one of them because I experienced it directly. And it was associated with the Uranus-Pluto Jupiter conjunction that happened in late 68, early 69. That was a timeline split that happened right then. Because actually this is represented by quite an interesting book that came out in 1970 called The Age of Aquarius. And it says technology and the Cultural Revolution. And what it suggested in this book is there were two paths. It's like that song, the two paths you can go on, but in the long run, you can always change. Anyway, you know the song, Stairway to Heaven. But anyway, one path was metristic humanism, which was connected to what we thought was the age of Aquarius, indigenous, back to the land, all be your archetype, just the whole counterculture that was happening. And the other was oh my God, let's hope it's not technocracy. Everything goes in the direction of just complete technology, Aquarian, a hive mind, and this was presented in 1970 as the two paths. But I saw the timeline split when I was in the basement of my parents' home, watching the dark force descend upon the Democratic Party during the 1968 convention. And everything really shifted after that. The tear gassing at the Washington moratorium, there was really energy moving toward a place anything could happen, the whole new world. And then soon after that, it got shut down and the timeline split differently because it wasn't yet the time in order to have the possibilities that we have now. But I've also saw one that happened at the eclipse. We had an event at the eclipse in April, and we had a group of 22 people watching that eclipse. And as we saw the plasma going out, literally every person in our group had a heart-opening experience from that. So that was also a timeline split. So that basically it's almost like there's different points where you finally have a choice to make a decision. Are you going to be on whatever expression you want to use for it? The ascension timeline, or the 5D, or prime Earth? Is that we've been given different times to make a choice. So which timeline are you going to be on? And people are, unfortunately, right now are often choosing. I want to be in the matrix. I choose to. I desire. I want to be be hooked up to the satellite grid and have have a chip in my head and so on. People are making those choices. I think the next one is essentially next March, and I think that's the big one.
2025 or 2026?
2025.
The end of the Kali Yuga.
Right, and also the new Mercury and Venus cycles, basically everything matches as far as what happened 5,000 years ago in Samaria, as far as Venus, Mercury, and the Sun, and then it's also the fourth turning, also. Which is many different frameworks on it. And it's the last lunar standstill within the Great Turning. A lot of things about 2025.
Wow, yeah.
Well, and I was just thinking about how, Jaime brought in the Libra Venus star opening, and that Daniel was mentioning that when you look at it with the heliacal rise, that's been going on for a while. And, one thing that's come in recently for me, in our awakening processes, we come across information and material, and we're learning and we're unlearning, and is this process of understanding common law, which I'd heard about in 2020, kind of became a thing, and was like, oh, really? We don't need to do all these things. But I actually just connected with this very powerful training with this guy who's hilarious. And really talks about how the enslavement happened legally, that we actually have this corporate entity, Enceladus, and then we have our true man or woman self, and that these people that are seeing that there is a parallel legal system and learning how to use that are actually extricating themselves from the matrix. And this guy he's like, yeah, sue me. I want you to sue me because I will tear you apart in a court of law, because the law actually is coded to give us this freedom from these debts and this slave system that we all thought we needed, and we didn't know, and we signed away what we were signing away, our rights. And so there's remedy to that. And so I think that that's really interesting, that that's coming into consciousness right before this big moment, this big next time split, because I had no idea. I mean, I am studying night and day. I'm just like trying to understand all the nuance of it, because you don't want to do something like that lightly, but to really understand how we have a lot more power than we think we do. There's, he's teaching this path to what he calls infinite money. The way that the Federal Reserve and the banking system works is actually we're funding our own loans with money that we have. It's a whole, like, it's blowing my mind. But I think there's something about that justice to go, what you're saying, Daniel, about do not comply. Like, how deep do we take that? when we really see like, oh, we're going to pull our kids out of the schools, we're going to homeschool them, we're not going to go along with this financial system, it's like we could really start to make some noise and create some new ways of being on a day-to-day basis, which is where a lot of it lands for a lot of people, right? They're so stressed, they have health issues from the stress, they're working. And how do we throw off those yokes and actually have some fun and put some flowers in our hair and go to the park and dance again like they did back in the day?
Well, I'll give you a really good example of that. The previous iteration of our school was a 501c3, and we decided that we're not, because even 501c3s, it was a scam. All right. So because you're still under the jurisdiction of the United States of America, the corporation, and they still run how you do things. Okay. So basically, I learned about this from a lot of the alternative practitioners I knew in California, who they decided we don't want to keep our license because we still wish to do hands-on healing. We still want to do all these things that we can't do when we're, when people are social distancing, locked up, or the whole thing. And so basically all these people that I know, including our school, we've moved to the Private Membership Association, which is a common law entity. They're not going to shut those down because guess what? The American Bar Association, the Boy Scouts of America, all of these big boy groups are private membership associations, which is why they don't pay taxes. It is a massive scam, and just that unfortunately people like us didn't even know that you could actually do that. But we've been learning.
Where do you see all that going? Like with the collapse of all that? I mean, Uranus and Taurus, like a major shakeup with currency, the way we view currency, self-worth, abundance. Then Chiron's going to move into Taurus and the healing that comes with that, perhaps. Like those kind of systems and that part of the shift. Because I always look at like Uranus and Pluto like the Death and Tower card. Uranus is like the wrecking ball, and Pluto's like, all right, we're going to die and we're going to be reborn, we're going to transform, we're going to alchemize. So on the Uranus front, when it comes to things like the IRS and some of these things that have been in place, what do you see with currency and just the way we're going to just transition as a society? And what do you feel about this new administration, you guys, like Trump, with the astrology?
I'm sure I could go on and on about that. Let me open it up to other people. But I have a very clear opinion about what's going to happen currently.
Well, it seems there's a nice pause of nobody else jumping in. So
Adam was trying to talk, but he's
it was my fault. I didn't have the mute off. Also, I was going to jump in.
I know, that's so funny when that happens. All right, so
but I want to answer your question, but I feel like I'm answering your question with a question. Maybe I just feel like there's a strong connection with what's been brought up in the past like 10 minutes with the sovereignty and really, not complying and standing up. And, from Daniel's perspective, just in general with, the whole age of Aquarius, and then with Sasha talking about the specifics of the legal system, I can't help but see this parallel to relationships in general. And so, Laura, you talk so much. I mean, we're all here very much, I think, aligned with the idea of love and universal love and compassion and these things in general. But in your book, Laura, you talk a lot about, love and walking away from abusive relationships and damaging relationships. I think this is where part of this really comes into play, because it's the saying no, it's the standing up for better. But that's where it gets tricky, I think, because if we want to be loving beings, sometimes that feels very at odds with people's idea of, what it means to be loving and standing up for yourself. In fact, a lot of times people don't look at standing up for yourself as a loving thing to do, for instance, right? So whether it's to the government, whether it's to a narcissistic partner or an abusive parent or whatever it is, or an abusive financial system, right? That's where I'm making that connection. How do we find that place of like, okay, I actually need to stand up for myself and do something about it versus like it's just better if I starve it and I don't engage and I completely just ignore. So it seems like a paradox. We have to be more loving and more compassionate, but at the same time, we have to be stronger and more willing to say no when it's clear that maybe this particular person, group, or entity doesn't deserve compassion and instead just deserves a hard boundary. What does everyone else think about
Oh,
that? Maybe as it relates
Well,
to
I think
currency.
that that's what the last 4 years was about. We've been in warrior training, and I feel like this shift that's happening in March, it's a Venus and Aries cycle, and Daniel knows more about the Mercury piece too, which I haven't looked at. And it's lining up with the end of the Kali Yuga. It's like, okay, we've had 4 years of this. What is it like to stand alone? What is it like to be the only one in the room? What is it like to get rejected by your family? What is it like to really stand for what you know is true? And I feel like now those of us that have done that are linking together and being like, okay, now how are we going to create something different? But it feels like that's been a lot of, for my journey, the sorting. It, like, things have really been sorted. It's been painful and there's been grief. A lot has fallen away. But like Laura was saying, like, that has to die for the new to be reborn. So I feel like we're well positioned to be, team next level Aquarius freedom.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone's been saying, and I've been really tuning into as we have these outer planets shift, Neptune into Aries, Uranus into Gemini, but particularly, I believe it's in 2026 when we have Saturn also move into Aries, and we have that Neptune-Saturn conjunction at the beginning of Aries. And with Pisces, there can be this, and I have a lot of Pisces energy, right? Like Pisces, of course, there's that connection to like source consciousness, and it's very intuitive and connected to the spirit realm. But there's also, we've been dealing with so much of the shadow of Pisces, which is the collective being under the spell, where everything's very kind of murky and nebulous. And I feel with Neptune going into Aries, it's really going to bring some clarity, I think, on a collective level about people having. Aries brings this sharpness and this pristineness sometimes, like in vision, that I think on a collective level, we've had so many people waking up already, everyone who's tuning into this, we've woken up from that spell to some degree. And I feel like we're going to have a lot more within the collective, kind of have that clarity of seeing the spell or the mind control, the things that they were consenting into without realizing it. And I feel as Saturn comes to meet Neptune there in 2026, it's like kind of the gravity or the heaviness or the karma of people kind of realizing who were, like, just for example, people who were supporting the jab, like all of a sudden waking up and realizing like the gravity, the Saturn heaviness of what they were consenting to and supporting to create. And I think that while there's a lot of heaviness there, I think there's also a lot of hope among people waking up and then let's create a new reality here. And I do
Well,
sense
it's a capacity to more clearly and courageously choose that's the timeline you're going to be on. As more and
absolutely.
more people are there to support that. But if I wanted to go back to what Adam had brought up there, it's like the answer I would have to you, Adam, is that it really depends on what place of the wheel you're on. I mean, some individuals archetypally are going to be like Jesus with the whip, going in and taking out the money changers. Other people, they can't really do that with equanimity, so therefore they are going to maybe be doing something different. Maybe they just want to have a safe place to raise their children. It depends on what your dharma is, but the most important thing is to know what yours is, because in a sense, if you know what your place on the wheel is, it really does not matter what happens, whether it's a conflagration, whether it's a world war, whatever. If you know, it's like a great story of St. Francis of Assisi, where he's out hoeing his garden. And someone comes up to him and says, what would you do if you knew you would die at sunset? And he said, I'd keep hoeing my garden. You know, I mean, basically, if your dharma is to raise children, you raise children, and even if you're a gardener, even if it all ends in 6 months, you still do your dharma. You still do what the place on the wheel that you came in to be on is. That's why it's so important to know your mission and purpose statement.
I just want to jump quickly. Thank you so much, Daniel. That was a really great answer. And it's just like, I've been saying that honestly to my clients too for some time. It's like, that's why knowing the nodal axis is so crucial because, what's loving for you might not be appropriately loving for another person. But Jaime, given your resonance with the Piscean nature, I know, your Mercury is a strong connection there. I'm curious, because it's related right to this shifting of the ages that Daniel was talking about with the Mercury and Venus retrograde cycle that's happening in March. Well, on February 1st, or just the day before, depending on where you are in the world, we have the Moon conjunct Saturn and then Venus conjunct Neptune and the North Node, all in Pisces. Right. So I feel like this is kind of important, especially given our conversation and then this relationship context of, dreaming the dream or living the nightmare. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Jaime, on that one.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so much. I mean, I think to me, like just tuning into your question is, I mean, it's like the more we can maintain our sovereignty, right, is a difference between dreaming our own dream into reality, this new dream, versus dreaming the nightmare that they're trying to get us to dream into. And it just really makes me tune into, when we're looking at Aquarian energy, naturally we want to look at like, where is Uranus? That's going to be a key to the story with to give us like, what are we dealing with the current Aquarian activation? So Pluto going into Aquarius, right? We want to look to, well, right now Uranus is still in Taurus, which is telling us staying human, right? Staying grounded, staying embodied, connected to our nature, connected to our natural world. Like this is when with this like shadow Aquarian energy, I think that Daniel, that you spoke about the technocracy that they're trying to push us all into, essentially they're trying to push the collective into giving away their soul so to be hijacked by technology. And the more we can stay grounded and embodied and real and organic and human, like that's where the magic is. Uranus and Taurus is really sending us so many cosmic downloads on how to activate our DNA, to really activate the genius of our body wisdom and the healing of our bodies, that people have totally lost touch with. And so I know I've kind of gotten off on a big tangent here, but it's like being connected to our realness and our embodied nature and our human nature, and having that sovereignty is what allows us to dream that new dream into reality, as opposed to unconsciously consenting to birth another dream. And one other piece I want to touch on with that I feel like somewhat relates is, we've had a lot of discussion on the Chiron and Aries, and to me, one of the biggest things that the Chiron and Aries is supporting us to heal is how to live life truly alive. With Aries, if you look at it from like the evolutionary astrology perspective, being the first sign of the zodiac, that's all about it's consciousness, that spark of consciousness, where we kind of just metaphorically land in the human body, and it's like, wow, I have all of life to experience. Like the world is at my fingertips. I can create anything. And one of what the powers that like shouldn't be, that the whole agenda has been to strip people and siphon people of their life force energy and their aliveness, getting people to run on the hamster wheel with this kind of debt-based culture and all the poisons that have made people so sick and run down their life force energy. So the more we can restore and reclaim our, not only our life force energy, but just living life truly alive. And I mean, that's like really an act of rebellion and this time. And I think that's part of the key to the medicine of what you were sharing. Well, kind of that goes into the question too, Adam.
Yeah, so good, Jaime. And it also reminds me what you're saying about how many people with Uranus and Taurus and the wisdom of our bodies. Just think about how many people now are talking about trauma, the nervous system, listening to it's like gone mainstream, right? And it feels like a manifestation of what you're pointing to.
I love that.
Gosh. Yeah, just the creative imagination, just like Saturn. Um, it's like the reality that manifests from what you believe is solidifying, but at the same time, with the North Node, you know, in uh Pisces, it's almost like reality is a lot more fluid than we think. We're going to be a lot more empowered in our elemental bodies. Like when we move into higher levels of consciousness, we work with the elements instead of like geoengineering or mind control on humans. It's like, wow, we're in harmony, with nature, and 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 that's a slow process. It's not going to happen overnight, but it feels like the dismantling of these dark weapons within ourselves is what's happening in the world on the bigger scale. We have to do it within ourselves for it to, appear. Like we win the war within, and we'll start to see a world reflect back to us, something ascending. That's kind of how I feel, just, because the nucleic acids of our DNA being elemental, earth, air, fire, water, ether, and how that corresponds to the zodiac and the signs, and the way that there's been this control mechanism placed upon humanity by infecting the creative imagination with propaganda, indoctrination, and programmings, mind control, and all these labels and ailments and diagnoses and political parties and just all these different ways to um, capture us in something that we identify with to then work with and heal from. It's like the Saturn part is going to, with Pisces, help us to invite Saturn to be the master, instead of being told what to do. It's the trials and tribulations of Saturn that are bringing us into the self mastery of, I'm in charge of my dreams. Now, even those that might have made a choice that they regret in their awakening, when it really solidifies and they realize what they've done, like you said, Jaime, it was so brilliant what you were saying. When they catch up with like the ramifications of some of the choices that they've made, um, they're still moving into the North Node of being able to dream and envision what's possible. Nothing is fixed. It's not as bad as it seems. There's no real doom and gloom, no matter how bad it's gotten, no matter how rock bottom or how invested in the system or how much you thought that authority cared about you and you did everything they told you to do and you got those jabs and you did what you thought was the right thing. Well, your heart was in the right place, and that heart is more powerful. And that's the alchemical part of it, where it dissolves this heavy lead Saturn and turns it into gold. Because I think love, and when I say love, that kind of love, of this compassion that you're talking about, Adam, too, of this Neptune, that we're going to be a compassionate society, that we're going to forgive ourselves, we're going to forgive each other, we're going to realize what we've been up against, this, and the healing will begin to help like us realize that the reality check is that we are divine humans, we are creators, and we can now work with the laws of structure of Saturn and be the multidimensional dreamers and creators that we are, instead of have Saturn squash it and limit it and control it and use it and leverage it to feed only its gain and our loss.
If I could flow on something after that,
I'm sorry, I'm not communicating very well tonight, you guys.
No, it's great. No, I like to flow off of yours and what Jaime brought up, because I do find something quite hopeful in the alignment with the North Node in Pisces. And I always like to think of the sign of Aries in the same way I think of the first house. So therefore, to have Neptune into Aries, Saturn into Aries, and it's just before that, Neptune with the North Node, that I think it's what we're really having as a possibility, particularly for those that are on the chosen timeline that we're talking about, is that the real transmission of Neptune into first house, into Aries, into the self, is the compassion that comes from the Ananda aspect of the one reality. So basically we have Sat Chit Ananda, and that's actually Neptune is the divine grace and mercy that comes from the sacred feminine, that is the womb of all creation. And the fact that that would then become available to those who choose a certain timeline, to choose to be a self, to choose to be first house, to have a personal identity that is open to receiving that divine grace and mercy that comes from Holy Mother, from Sophia, Christos Sophia. I mean, that is what I see as being hopeful in all of this. But that doesn't take away from the fact that the other stuff is happening also, but that gives us something which we can, a lot of my clients right now have a great deal of stuff going on with Pisces and Neptune. And it's always the message. It's like the last part of Pisces training is that you get to put yourself in the middle of the circle. You are also worthy of receiving grace and mercy. Even though you've spent lifetimes taking care of other people, saving other people, you're worthy also of receiving mercy and grace from our Holy Mother. So I think that's what flowed from what I heard you say.
I love that.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, Jaime, it looks like you have to go. Do you want to just share anything before you go?
Oh gosh, well,
So
thank you.
wonderful to meet you. My goodness, I'm just
I feel so honored and so humbled to be here. Gosh, I'm just feeling very inspired. And I love that we're speaking to the hope, because we are, I mean, like such a heavy time living in the world that we're living in, especially those of us with open hearts and who also can at the same time take a look into the shadows and go into the wounds to help transmute that. It's not easy. It's not an easy work being here, living with an open heart and being willing to, look at truth as well. And yeah, just kind of tuning back into like the North Node into Pisces. I think that it's like kind of even going off of like Adam, what you were sharing, and Laura as well, that there is so much, like, however you want to say it, cosmic, divine support, elemental support that is around us. And as the North Node goes into Pisces, I feel that it's going to be really supportive to tune into the divine support that's here more fluidly, but also just making a note that whenever there's like the Pisces, when we're also working with the Virgo, right? We have the South Node in Virgo there, to stay really attuned to our discernment. Like anytime there's a lot of Pisces energy and we can get so like, I mean, me, I have a very strong Pisces signature at my Mercury and North Node and other like asteroid goddesses and Pisces that, it's like I can get so into the connecting in intuitively and receiving the downloads and the guidance that it's always a good thing to check in with our discernment, to tune into like, is the guidance that we're connecting with have pure, benevolent, like loving intentions? There can be a lot of like hijack things out there. And so I just kind of want to bring in that invitation to open up and connect with all that divine support that's there, while also using our discernment as well to not get led astray or caught off guard there. But I think in this time, it's just so important that, like you said, Adam, that we're staying connected to what is our unique kind of sovereign dream. And I feel like that Pluto going into Aquarius is going to support, and Uranus going to Gemini, like finding our like-minded soul tribe with that similar vision, resonating at that similar vibration with that similar dream, to gather in communities and birth our new dreams into being. There's so much potential that I find really, really inspiring. So thank you all so much for
Oh,
that.
that's so great to hear that. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being here. It's so wonderful to meet
Yeah.
you. I look forward to doing more together.
I want to flow one more thing before you. Do you have a minute more, Jaime, or do you got a buzz?
Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking as you were speaking with the Pisces North Node, and I know, you also have, this depths of transformative energy. And, I think everyone here does. We've been on that journey of transformation. And one thing that I'm wondering what you think and what others think is, in some of the new age spirituality that's become much more popular, there's almost the sense of like, I have to separate from you so I can stay in my high vibration and have my good dream and manifest, and you're going to contaminate me. Whereas like I see the heroine's journey is like we can bring that love like all the way down into the underworld. Obviously, we're not going to open to people who want to extract energy from us, but like in the true heart connection, there's no infecting anyone else. So I was curious, like we can hold our vibration and we can bring that blessing anywhere. And I don't know, I just thought to ask you, like, because
I
I know
love
you have that nodal access as well, like how you experience, that discernment between like, oh, I'm going to discern who could be harmful, but then also not, I don't know, just like the difference between those two things. I'm going to
I
just,
love that
yeah,
question because
And
I've
the top with the
also
armor.
being someone who's incredibly energetically sensitive, I've found myself moving into those states of fear throughout my journey where it's like, oh, I have to stay away from this person or that person because of like the energy. And I've definitely like been in that kind of fear state and played that out before. But ultimately, kind of what I feel about is that that anytime we're doing that, and I know myself personally, I'm just speaking to my own journey. When I found myself doing that, there's something about within myself that I'm splintering, that I'm cutting off, that I'm fragmenting or suppressing or denying. And so I also have all that like Scorpio energy too, that can like be in the depth and be in it with anyone with whatever they're experiencing and hold that transformative energy. But yeah, absolutely. I agree that anytime I don't know, it's a fine dance. I don't even really have an answer to it where it is like this fine line of like when do we need to? And I like for me, like I don't know just what's coming up for me, like depending on how resourced I am is a like can I'm like not even making any sense, but how resourced I am, like on all levels, energetically, physically, emotionally, depends on how much I can hold space and be with just in my life. And so I notice when I'm feeling less resourced, that might be when I'm like, maybe I can't be around this person or this group like today. But when I'm more resourced, then I have more space and capacity to like be with it all. And I don't even really, that's such an amazing question. And it's such a applicable for me in my life on my journey. It's being someone who can be so energetically sensitive. It can be really painful. And it can be hard. Like, I mean, sometimes it can be hard to function out in the outside world because of that. And it's a beautiful question. It's like a journey that I've been on that dance with and working with. So yeah, I love that question. I'd love to hear everyone else's response
That's
to that
so
too.
wow. Well, I have like Neptune on my ascendant, and it's just like wow. I just thought like just the sensitivities and the empathic nature, the openness, and the discernment. It's like getting the armor. So
Before you,
or
Jamie,
in transit.
before you go, I really am very happy to meet you and to be able to share with
Right.
you very much. Before you go, there's something I wanted to ask very quickly, everyone on the panel, because we're multi-generational here. I'm Pluto and Leo. I'm curious about everybody's Pluto position. What sign?
Pluto and Scorpio.
Okay.
Pluto in Libra.
Pluto
Oh,
Libra.
Pluto
Okay.
and Virgo. We're going down the line.
And
Also Pluto and
Adam.
Libra. Also
Okay.
Pluto and Libra.
Okay. So of course I'm the only Pluto and Leo. All right. Okay.
Yeah, Pluto and
So we're linking. So Pluto and Leo, Pluto and Virgo, Pluto and Libra, Pluto and Scorpio. That's wonderful.
ah,
Always found that the Pluto in Leo generation has a natural resonance with the Pluto in Libra generation. I've noticed that in general over the years. Obviously, it's a very general thing to say, but that's what I've noticed. And often it's the Pluto in Virgos, not you, Sasha, but that don't like the Pluto and Leos. It's really often like that.
Well, I
Jamie,
think
just
that
oh,
also
sorry.
can be like just that, that's really our parents, right? So that part of that can be like the parental wound of, in many indigenous cultures, as I understand it, it's often the grandparents that raise the
Right, right.
children more than the parents, right? Because there isn't that rub, there isn't that same kind of wounding that can happen.
Yeah, the
So that's
grandparent can be the
interesting.
mentor to the grandchild, while the parent can't to the
Yeah,
child.
yeah. So it might be that dynamic in a larger collective way.
Good point. Adam.
Just before you go, Jamie, I just thank you so much for that answer. I think it was so beautiful and really the point about being resourced, and that dynamic nature of where our consciousness is relating to what kind of choices we're likely going to have access to in the moment. So I just thought that's such a beautiful reflection. And I'm just so grateful that you were here and that you had shared your presence with us. And just thank you so much. And
Oh, thank you. I'm just so grateful to be here and I love you all and thank you.
Thank you so much. So wonderful to meet you.
Oh, bye everyone.
Bye. So, anything left you guys want to share?
What do we not want to talk about the U.S. chart? And I wanted to
Yes.
cover your question about the financial.
And I would love if at some point we might riff a little bit more on, and we already have been, and I would love to hear Daniel's US chart, but also like just how are we interpreting if more people wanted to talk about what they think Pluto in Aquarius is going to look like the nature of Aquarius and the nature of Pluto. We've had some of that weaving, but I'd be curious to hear from Laura and Adam as well. So US chart is always good. The US chart is in it. So just
It
checking
was,
in.
yeah, I'll just try to make this brief. My God, if you want to see further what I've done on this, I have a lot of articles and videos out there on my website about it. But I use the Rajarian rectification of the Sibley chart from 1776. And the reason I use that is because I think it was esoterically backdated, that it was actually the good aspect of the Freemasonry group, not the Illuminati in Europe, designed that particular way. But there are three main shadows on the U.S. chart that are all being ticked off at this time period. And this is beyond the Pluto return and the Chiron return. And I also wanted to put on the table here that 2027 is the next Uranus return in the U.S. chart. So that's 2027. Because the Uranus on the U.S. chart is at 8 Gemini. In the last few years, the U.S. has been in a Neptune opposition. Now, what is important about that is that one of the most significant features of the U.S. chart is the Mars in Gemini square Neptune. Now, why this is one of the three shadows. The so-called founding fathers warned against a two-party country. That was one of the big things that they warned against. And yet it's built into the US chart that it sort of couldn't get out of it. Mars in Gemini conjunct Neptune. Now, since I've been a follower of the political process since the early 60s, it's what's marching on the right is now marching on the left. I mean, basically, it's this thing back and forth, even the arch federalist Lincoln was a Republican, and so basically the whole thing goes back and forth, back and forth. And that to me is the first of the three main shadows. The other is the clumping of planets in Cancer. Venus conjunct the Sun in the underworld, Jupiter in Cancer, Mercury retrograde in Cancer. There is a hopeful thing if you think of Jupiter as a good guy when Jupiter moves into Cancer next year. But Jupiter amplifies shadow also. So what is the shadow of Cancer part of the U.S. chart? Well, it's easy for me to look at it being someone who's lived out of the country so much. And that's like what the rest of the world thinks of the United States. this whole thing, we're number one, we're American exceptionalism, and a certain thing, not us here, but the average American doesn't really care that much about the rest of the world. That it's basically all about the United States, so it ends up becoming like Team USA, which ends up becoming the shadow of cancer. I love my children, but I don't care about any other children. The ability to not recognize the world as a family and only being centered in on what is centric to the U.S. And so that also is hugely in play regarding the Pluto return and the Chiron return. And the third thing is the sellout of the original ideals. I mean, the original chart is Aquarius moon, 27 Aquarius moon. It's in a major Uranian cycle at this time period and over the next months, but also the 13-degree Sag rising. And so basically the ideal, actually the storyline for the US chart is the Sagittarius job and the Sagittarius drive. Out of 144 storylines is pure Sagittarian. But what is the shadow of Sagittarius? It's fundamentalism. Fundamentalism. Yeah, I found the truth. Well, I'm not really sure if I found, but if I convince everybody else to believe what in it, then I don't have to think any more deeply about it. So basically, this desire to go into new territory, to be visionary, to really care about the whole planet, and that was the original dream of the country, the ideals of Sag and Aquarius, and there's been a massive sellout of that actually. And since I'm I know we're going to have to end this here shortly. But I did want to comment on what you brought up, Laura, about the financial stuff. Unless something stops it, unless there's some kind of solar outburst or the Earth expanding, and basically the Earth and the Sun themselves do something, or some kind of an energy coming from galactic center, which according to Bev Mishra, the book Yuga Shift, is basically that there is a heating up of the galactic center, which it will happen at this particular time. Unless those things happen, as far as I'm concerned, the current administration, the people that have been put into, if they're confirmed, but the ones that have been chosen by Trump, it's just a whole other way to put the digital money in and to put the digital control grid in. And it's basically looking at people like the ultimate deep state DARPA military contractor, Elon Musk, to have him essentially be, along with Peter Thiel and Eric Schmidt, be running the whole surveillance state thing. I don't have much hope. That even brings us to the crypto situation. Basically, that was a setup. That was also a DARPA project originally. And so basically, everybody getting into crypto, then it gets put into the version of it that the U.S. is going to do, which is not CBDC, but it's a whole different thing where the central banks, the Federal Reserve, runs the digital money. So I mean, I'm totally in the camp of people like Catherine Austin Fitts and Whitney Webb that have been calling this out, connecting the dots regarding who are these people that are actually behind the current Trump administration. And I'm not even getting into the Gaza Zionist thing. I'm only keeping it on the level of the technocracy, the digital money. And if it all goes to digital money, then that's it. End of game. No freedom after that. If you can't use cash, and if you can't be off the system, and if you can't be on the internet without a digital ID. And that is the ultimate takeover of the entire thing.
Yeah.
Which as far as I'm concerned, must be stopped.
Yes. I wanted to jump in because when we even look at what is the definition of money, which this guy in this common law, Brandon Joe Williams, I'm taking his course. Right. When you look at money, it is only gold and silver. Nothing else is money. That's not actually money. And I'm resonating with what you're saying. And I've been just thinking about how easily we're deceived, which I think is something that you're speaking to, Daniel. Like something can look so good, like, oh, great, we're going to have this freedom fighter, but then it's a twist. And so I think part of this process is becoming more aware of how we're manipulated And one of the things that I've been learning about, and I want to learn more, I don't know a lot, but how the 14th Amendment is a total sham. Like, we look at this as like the cornerstone. You know this, Adam? I didn't know this. The cornerstone of the civil rights movement, but it actually made us citizens. And in that word citizen, it made us slaves to the debt system, all of us. So we all became slaves for that. But that we can actually use the law when we know how to show up and we know how to legislate. I mean, not legislate, when we know how to use the legal system for our good, we can extricate ourselves from that system. And then we can actually begin to use money in new ways. So I was looking at the 14th Amendment, and it's kind of interesting. Not all of the states even ratified the 14th Amendment. Didn't know that. But the ones that did, June 13th, 1866, and Neptune was in Aries. It's like that spell of Neptune. So it'll be interesting with Neptune going into Aries again to see, are we going to undo that spell? Are we going to liberate that life force? Like, can you imagine if we lived totally debt free? We could just live our lives and we weren't,
I have a personal anecdote I can share on that. I'm old enough that the first job I ever had, I worked at McDonald's when I was 15 years old. We didn't have Social Security cards. So actually there was no withholding. It was given at age 18, which is when I had the Social Security card. It was soon after that they're issued at birth, and that puts you directly in as a not as a person, but as somebody within the domain of the United States of America, the corporation. And I was in behind closed doors one time with a bunch of sovereignty people like 25 years ago. These are people who spent 2 years getting their file. And it took many time periods of submitting the Freedom of Information Act to get their file, and so they would say, well, it came to me in computer code, so I had to send it back. And then they cut half and then redacted stuff. And finally they got it there. And we're sitting there in the circle with these people, and they said, look, I've got my file. Did you know I am a resident of Puerto Rico and I'm an arms manufacturer? So basically every person in the United States with a Social Security card or with a birth certificate is listed in the United States of America, the corporation, as being in one of 3 professions or living in one of the possessions or in DC. It's a straw man.
Amazing.
It's a straw man. The whole thing is a straw man.
Yeah. Our ens identity. And I think
then it's traded on the wall. It's traded, but they have it. They basically have they designate what you're worth. And then you are traded. The straw man is traded on the stock market.
Yeah, it's so mind-blowing. I'm curious, Laura, if you've come across any of that material and like how you see that intersecting with this issue of sovereignty and the age of Aquarius. And I know you have been down a lot of rabbit holes. I'm pretty new to this one, but it seems like it has an important role to play, as Pluto continues to wake us up to the shadows of everything that's been put into place and the traps that are set for us to take away our sovereignty.
The whole Babylonian slave money system, it's so interesting that Eisenhower put "in God we trust" on it, right? So all of this currency, when I think of like Taurus and self-worth and abundance and just everything shifting in that regard with the astrology, with Uranus, I think our perception of currency is just going to shift because it's been this sort of paradigm of enslavement and working under somebody, and this punishment reward system. It's going to be currency that is more based in abundance, coming from spiritual virtues and just like healing and just all the beautiful aspects of the higher octaves of Taurus. Like Uranus is the wrecking ball of the Taurus that might have been more superficial, more about appearances, more about like you were saying, the Persephone going into this underworld of, Aquarius, of who am I? Who am I? Who am I really? And Aquarius is like, I'm true to myself. I'm the fool. I'm the rebel. I just want to be free. Well, what's the shadow of that? Well, let's avoid that and go into transhumanism and get all like into the technological part of it, and escapism and detachment from the soul, and aloofness, and just like, where you get so far away that you lose. Do you guys kind of feel me? It's
Oh yeah,
so
definitely.
so
Yeah.
so Uranus Taurus, which is interesting, being Earth, and that Venus, this identity shattering. When we look at currency and abundance and what we're worth, and we're transitioning into all of this, it's like the Pluto Aquarius part of it, I feel, is like this liberation of finding a sense of identity with all the Chiron Mars stuff that we're talking about, finding a sense of identity in recognizing the magic and flow of our divine wisdom and intelligence and manifestation abilities. Like, if we value love and community and this earth, it's like all the skills and resources that we each have, we can begin to pull together. All the gifts and just all the treasures that, oh God, I can't even talk, you guys. Just,
We feel you. We
it's
feel
just like
you.
it's just the currency to me is just like shifting into something a lot more organic, instead of engineered and produced in order to keep us in this debt enslavement reward punishment system, where our self-esteem is based in that, like, good boy, good girl, you did this right, you can have a mansion because you're serving our agenda, you're going to be the popular ones, you're the famous ones, you're going to be out there, you can sell your soul because this is what, it's, quick fixes and blah blah blah, and it takes you down a dark road. That's all crumbling. And so Uranus with the wrecking ball, it's like, what is currency? What is self-worth? It's like things that are nourishing, things that are about, what it so yeah, gold and silver. And just when we're talking about Ophiuchus and these gateway, just like you earn it, and what you work hard for in abundance, it's rewarding because it's beautiful and people are healing and you're happy, and we're crying and laughing together, and we're realizing, what we've all been through. We're putting our egos aside, and we're not worried about who's right and wrong. It's not a battle anymore. It's just like more about a family, it's like feeling a sense of family. And I don't know.
Genuine cancer. That's the expansion of the vision of what cancer can be. A great deal of what we do in our research is expanding beyond what we were trained to believe science meant, and expand to a global version of it. So therefore, cancer is not just my clan, my family, my country. It's essentially the whole world. So all children can be nourished, including the child within us. That's the thing that could happen with Jupiter in Cancer, expanding all those Cancer planets on the U.S. chart. It could also expand the shadow. That becomes even more. Our team is the one. Like the Biden at one point says, there is a new world order, and we intend to lead it. That was a very articulate statement, and it looks to me like Trump is wanting to do the same thing. It's basically to make sure that the dollar dominance remains one way or the other. including like, the trade wars that are going to happen from this. Not that I think that BRICS on any level is a savior, because they've adopted exactly the same program, the same digital ID program, the same vaccine passports, the same WEF banking system. They all go bowed to the shrine of the International Bank of Settlements. I mean, all of them are on the same team. It's just the only difference is that the Trump team thinks they want the U.S. to lead it. That's really the only difference. When in fact, I call it the dark state, not the deep state. The dark state is which is running both sides of the duality or the polarity. That's how I see it anyway.
Thank you, Daniel. I just keep thinking about how those of us who are the outlanders, or in a family system, oftentimes it's that black sheep that becomes the golden child eventually, because there's something about that process, that initiation. And I love what you're saying about family and Laura's saying about family. And I think I'm just so in it right now. My own life has been Plutoed like completely. So, it's like I am seeing that we do have a social credit score, like through this perfect storm of going into business and taking out loans with the government to do this thing and taking that ride. And then having things really contract this last year, that my credit score, now I got evicted and I can't get rentals because I don't have a good credit score. And, there's like even a woman who I know who's a mother, and we've like shared story about, our custody situations being very similar and very hard. That was, my first initiation as a warrior has been protecting my daughter and her body and her sovereignty for the last, pretty much since Pluto went into Capricorn. That's when I got divorced and I started this advocacy for my daughter. But this woman wanted to rent her place to an Airbnb and get the more money. And so she wouldn't rent to me even, and she doesn't have to, but it was just like, oh, my heart, to see the ways that we're still operating in that old system when there's so much calling out for the new family, the new kindred spirits to come together and find new solutions. Because I do feel pretty left out in the dust right now, and I've been in this community for 25 years, so it's pretty intense.
Oh yeah.
Well, I look forward to talking with you in more depth individually, Sasha.
Yeah. Well, I think those of us that I would so welcome that, but it's this way that we go through these processes so that we can understand the depths of loss and how we can reference our heart. Like no one can take away our self-worth. Like you said that a few times, Laura, about the self-worth and the value. Well, that's also Venus, right? Like no one can stop us from that self-love and that self-esteem and that self-worth thing. And if we can go through these really intense stripping experiences and come on the other side and being like, no, you can't take it from me. I'm giving it to myself. It's like then we become better guides, because people are scared. When their little bit of security goes away, they get scared and they're clinging and be like, no, be that fool. Step off the cliff with me.
Right. And that's why it's so critical with the Chiron, how they're trying to leverage the painful part of this process. It's like, well, if you get more confused, if you get more drawn into like this realm that they're trying to steer them into, to disconnect, it's like this bait. It's like baiting the wound, like that Chiron is like baiting the wound of like self-worth, like into this whole other thing that with this transition that isn't working, that they tried to do, this indoctrination of our children, and now it's like it could come back around into what you're saying, because there's always this attempt to hijack. It's a thing, and hijacking our capacity to understand worth based in what we value and what we put our energy and time into, and get back just the energetic exchanges. Like, are you working for something? Are you working under someone? Or are you in service to humanity, doing what you love and seeing the reward of happiness and joy, and feeling like you can sleep well at night because you you live from your heart and your integrity, and your spiritual world and your physical world are integrated. And that's the Pisces Virgo integration I feel is mixed into all that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the integrity, it's like no one can take that from you. And I think my daughter and I were having this conversation, and she's like, why have all these things happen? Like, it's just been like, oh my goodness. It's like, well, it's an initiation. If we're going to be powerful and we're going to be leaders, it's important, I think, to have that humility. And that's what that, to me, that's the gift of Pluto, is that like absolute humility, where you're just so, like, okay, mystery, okay, universe, okay, God, wherever you go, it's like, show me, guide me, may I be of service for this time. And there's nothing like having everything stripped, that Plutonian relentless stripping that really helps us to feel into the power that's within us, because I think that's what Pluto wants. The power is within us. The power of creators, as you were saying.
Well, and stripping everything away from us that we think we need and that we've been conditioned to depend upon, that when it's not showing up in the way that we thought, or it's just not it's defining us and saying, like, you're going to be rejected because you don't have these scores, and everything is like graded and rated, and or if you're in debt, or if you're this or you're that. And it's just like it's
A
just
very, very, very interesting factor here, you guys.
engineered form of it, that we're shifting into this rebirth of something better.
The Taurus being the resonant polarity with Scorpio, even the Romans remembered another name for Pluto, which they used, was Pluton, which means wealth. Not the hijacked version of it, which is called a plutocrat, but what the original meaning of that was, the wealth that comes from real Taurus, meaning the earth, what the basically the chthonic realms, the lava tubes, the kundalini from the center of the earth up, the powerful waveforms that were below the surface of the ocean. That's the wealth. That's the wealth.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to articulate. Is just,
I know. That's why I thought I'd jump in about that.
Yeah.
If the real wealth comes from our fact that human beings are part of the earth.
And we're abundant.
Yeah.
And just all this, every house, every zodiac sign, every has its infiltration of some kind of program, dark Saturn, just manipulation.
Adam, it looks like Adam wanted to jump in. He's been trying.
Go ahead, Adam.
Oh no, it's fine. I don't want to interrupt anybody either, so it's a fun little dance. I just love the Chiron reconnection to the conversation, and getting back to Sasha's question from before about Pluto and Aquarius and what kind of vibes we feel with this. And I'm going to connect it with Chiron here in a second, because it's the financial system, its value, its worth. They say, right, well, we generally speaking, they agree that Uranus is exalted in Scorpio, right? Uranus, the ruler of Aquarius. And I was thinking, based on that relationship, if there wasn't a similar, inverse or parallel relationship with Pluto in Aquarius, right? It's the opposite end of that sort of planetary relationship in the dignities. And apparently I found out from an astrologer friend of mine that there are some people who call that an exaltation, having Pluto in Aquarius. Some astrologers who actually say that. And Daniel, you might have some different thoughts about it, but I think there is definitely some kind of affinity there in terms of the way that both Scorpio and Aquarius have to do with trauma. I would say Aquarius is more like the nervous system shock, right? Being in shock. And then Pluto is like pain and trauma that might be associated with pain. So I think there is a lot of that like massive, deep upheaval that we could find with the Pluto and Aquarius, generation that we're moving into. And then it also makes me wonder, how that deals with collective finances when we're talking about Scorpio in the 8th house and our shared resources, right? And now we mentioned it already, but we didn't talk much about it. I think this is perfect where it goes in terms of Chiron's about to enter into Taurus in 2026, right? So where do all of these energies come together? And maybe the question isn't, okay, how can we generate more money or, heal issues of self-worth, which I think are totally valid in themselves. But, you know, transforming our relationship to self-worth and money and resources and learning to find more resourcefulness in this massive new transformational
Well,
landscape that
I should point out, Adam, that if you look back on the history of Chiron moving through Taurus, every one of those time periods was a time of some major economic collapse.
I figured that's why I wanted to bring it up.
Mm-hmm. Seriously, if you
I'm
go,
not saying I'm looking forward to it. I have my South Node in the second house, so I have a lot of personal karma with self-worth and finances, and been working hard and making progress with it my whole lifetime. So when I saw Chiron in Taurus transit, I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to like put any, fear out there in the world. I think again, there's the healing of the resourcefulness, but also at the same time, if you're seeing a storm coming, it might be good to,
well, but
prevent.
that's what my bottom line is on Pluto and Aquarius. It's designed to create the demolition of what the system had been before. And basically it's designed to call out the shadow of Aquarius. That's what it's
Right.
designed to do. So there can actually be a transformation. There can actually be new life that comes out of what has been composted.
Right.
So I just see the tendency is always, I've seen this through my entire life, an attempt to glamorize Aquarius. I mean, it was the glamour sign all through the 70s. So I actually spent it up outraging sometimes the astrological community by telling Aquarius jokes, and almost nobody knew what the jokes were. Like one of them would be, "What is the shadow of Aquarius?" And the shadow of Aquarius, oh, there is no shadow. or the other is that why do Aquarians believe in unconditional higher love? Because it's a good idea. not coming from the organic heart. But then again, I want to throw something in so we're talking about this. It has to do with the nature of the constellation and the sign. And I want to throw something in here just for you to spec. This is a speculation. The original constellation was streams of water. Now, when the Hellenists came up with the sign, when they decided to create characteristics of the sign, they turned it into an air sign. When that entire region of the sky is water. It's the only place in the sky where there are streams. You can see the little water droplets if you're under a dark night sky. They turned it into an air sign, and then you see the wave, or it could either be an electricity wave or it could actually be a water wave. But I want to suggest something even more radical. This was something that came from the work of the wife of Robert Schoch. Robert Schoch is the individual that discerned the Sphinx is much older than what the Egyptologists say it is. They're actually now in the quote age of Aquarius, not the sign, the constellation, because the age of Aquarius is it's not the sign, it's the movement of the spring equinox into that constellation, not the sign. That's where the big misunderstanding is. But actually what is coming out of the water picture is plasma. That's what is being poured out of the water picture in the sky. So it's plasma, which is why I believe that now all this new research is started from David Bohm, which is that, and Robert Temple, any number of individuals are writing about this now. It's not the fourth state of matter, it's the first. 99% of the universe is plasma. The sun is plasma. It's not a fission, it's not a fusion thing going on. It's plasma. And you can see the plasma under a solar eclipse. While back in previous yugas, human beings could see it. They could see the gods walked amongst us. You could see the archangels, you could see the demons. Basically the plasma beings were visible. Now you have to have altered states now, or whether you do really intense spiritual practices, then you can directly perceive it. But not the average human cannot. That's what happens in Kali Yuga. So I like to think of it now as the age of Aquarius, as the streams of plasma coming down And actually that's both good and bad. I mean that's plasma, which is actually what caused the Younger Dryas. It was streams of stuff coming down from the sun that caused the glaciers to melt and to have 1,200 years of freeze up, and then more plasma strikes it, and then you had the raising of the oceans. So that's all in the geological record now. Anyway, that's my spiel.
Mhm. Well, it's cool that the Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are all flowing together, and it's interesting. Gosh, just I just love the outer planets, the intensity of it all. It's just like, just like the death in the tower, and then I see just like Neptune, um just that water, yeah, but multidimensional, like all possibility. Like when we like think about disclosure or contact or blah blah blah, but I see it more like upgrading well, not upgrading, but switching on what's been asleep in our dormant DNA, and recognizing so much more of all that we are. And as Uranus comes in with the wrecking ball with Taurus to help us to crumble that false sense of self-worth that's based in the way we've been labeled and defined, and how we have to like try and achieve it to be rewarded for it, and if we don't, then we're a loser, or we feel bad about ourselves, we have insecurities and body image issues, that we're cracking that down to find self-worth in what we value, which is love, which is community, which is this earth, which is our children, which is healing, which is like, all the higher spiritual virtues. I see it like the seven deadly sins and the seven spiritual virtues. You go in the seven gates of hell and you experience all those, shadow energies, the seven spiritual virtues, and the cleansing process of it all, the alchemical, shift is like cleansing all these houses and zodiacs of where, in our consciousness, it's been infiltrated by, these archetypal, maybe Anunnaki influences that have disrupted, this electric flow, the masculine and feminine, from integrating.
Well, I want to
I
thank
always
you.
see the North Node and the South Node as a saving grace in the zodiac, because that knows that the soul is always seeking the opposite to integrate, and the soul will carry the memories from the lifetime before to seek, what it needs in this lifetime to work out all the patternings that it was born into, to, whether it's the family energy and ancestral stuff, or the time that you were born in the planetary system, where it's at in its own healing process that you were born into, that the nodes, and why the eclipses, amplify that is because that restoration.
Well, I want to thank you for actually, and I hadn't thought of it before until you put it in your email, that the sextile and trine relationships between Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto coming up, which I'm now getting a really strong intuition, is the fulfillment of the conjunction that happened in 575 BC. That the 575 BC, which is what began our journey to get to this point, which is the development of the individual separate from the whole planet. And so that although three is coming back together, I mean, this is exactly what Rujar's vision was. He basically saw the whole process of human evolution as being like a thesis, antithesis, and a synthesis. The thesis was clan, tribal, hunter-gatherer culture. Then the enshrinement of the individual, separate from that. And then the synthesis is what he called the planetarization of consciousness. The planetarization of consciousness but that can't go directly to some collective globalism. You have to have the individual enlightenment and evolution happening, and then it goes into the noosphere and everything. I mean, basically, everything that the planet Earth is as a living being is then the synthesis of this whole process of evolution. And I believe that you're bringing to light the sextile trine relationship between those three is the fulfillment of what happened at the beginning of the antithesis. So we could say that the thesis was all the way back 350,000 years ago when our version of human being first attained physical form, you know. I mean, I'm doing the mystery school teachings right now, you know, that basically in Lemuria and before, the body was not dense, you know. I mean, basically in each yuga and each cycle, 12 precessional cycles, 312,000 years, and that's about how long our version of human being has been on this planet. But we had been here, and according to the mystery schools, we've been here for billions of years, just not in physical form. And as the things become more and more and more and more dense, then now we're in the most dense of where the spirit has come so far down into matter and into materialism that can't get any more deep, which is why the conflagration comes, which as has happened before. You know, you basically have to compost the whole Kali Yuga in order to have a birth into a whole new cycle, which I believe is prime Earth.
Beautiful. I wanted to just chime in. I'm gonna need to sign off soon too.
Me too. I mean, good God, we've been doing 3.5 hours. Or I mean, geez, this
we're
is
doing
incredible.
amazing. I was thinking about what you were saying just now with the evolutional process, also that now we're learning, or I'm learning, let me speak of me, of how do I include the land? So how do we have that radical local experience of the mystery? And so as I've been, you know, losing my home of 9 years and having this like really disorienting experience with that, it's like I've been really talking to the land here. The land here has held me so profoundly, and asking where, you know, show me the way, show me the next place, not the house, but what land is ready to, you know, support me in
where are you? Where are you?
I'm in Northern California right now. Yeah.
So did you feel the earthquake? Did you feel the earthquake?
I did not feel the earthquake. I got the tsunami warning. I didn't want to leave my house because I wasn't sure. I didn't want to leave my animals here. So I think I want to bring that in about value and the shift. I think having that sense of the land, and when I go out on this land on the coastal ridge and, you know, I'm in that prayer, whatever you want to call it. I don't really call it a prayer, but like a dreaming into what I'm creating. You know, it's like the birds come out and talk to me and they show themselves to me and they give me messages, and I feel like that's a different kind of wealth. It's like, all right, the credit score is not so good, but
Yeah, that's,
you know,
right.
the ecosystem
Yeah,
got me.
totally. Yeah. And I just love, you know, the things that get shaken up and like the, because it's like the ultimate breakup. And and with Pluto and these outer planets, it's like everything it's shaking us loose from is just like returning us to like the real meaning of it. Everything has been archonic, imitation, you know, addiction matrix, personality matrix, very limited to, you know, all these different tactics to, you know, like hook us in on a very superficial level, not a soulful level, not a spiritual level. You know, even religion never really tapped into the spiritual. It's been more about like punishment and control and am I good enough? You know, and now it's like, you know, the real experience, these, you know, like you were saying, the three planets that were in conjunction that are now, you know, coming into this harmony. They're all just like getting along because they were duking out for a while with that Uranus Pluto square for a long time. And then, you know, when pandemic hit, there was you just when we see where the outer planets have been, and now they're all like, you know, it's just really wild.
Yeah, it is wild.
But
I'm going to have to head off too.
yeah.
Adam, maybe before I head off, I'd love to hear your last word here, Adam.
Yeah.
I don't think I had one, actually. I was just Excited to hear all the amazing wisdom coming from everybody. I'm so grateful to have gotten a chance to connect with you, Daniel. I'm gonna have to really dive deeper into your astrology handbook, the shamanic work. While I have you, actually, because I wanted to ask you this question before, your book is kind of famous for giving a mystery school to each sign of the
Mhm.
zodiac. Could you
Right.
maybe share just like a little bit about that, and if you want to connect it to any of the topics here today or not? I mean, I'm just curious to hear more about
Mystery
that.
School of Aquarius, maybe?
Yeah.
Well, I kind of alluded to most of that here, all during interjecting that all during this talk. No, we do not emphasize sun signs. I mean, we value the sun as great mystery, but we don't put any kind of archetype on top of it. So you're born on the seasonal calendar. You're born in a certain month. But we place a lot more of attention on the moon and Venus and Mars, and particularly the ascendant. The word horoscope does not mean even originally did not even mean the whole chart. Horoscope meant the ascendant, and that was the thing that was necessary in order to create a personal chart, and that all happened around that same time period. So actually, I look at all the signs, not sun signs per se, but the 12 signs as 12 mystery schools of life. And there is a training in each of them. There's a shadow side of each of them, and then there's also the what you would say the intent of it. Each of the mystery schools has an intention that is brought into the wheel of life. We need all of them. And then but the other factor is that at the turning of an age, then there's a new transmission that comes through into those signs. So in other words, the Aries of 6,000 years ago is not the same as the Aries of today, but it still has an essence of Aries. But there's just like there's a different transmission that's coming into it. Like during the Taurean age, then the bull is whatever you call that group of stars is in bringing stuff into it. So we're one of our projects in our school is evolving the mystery schools. Like trying to get a sense of what a new Cancer could be. We have spent a huge amount of time on looking at the shadow of Aries and how do you evolve Aries. I try to touch onto that. Aquarius, I mean, the ultimate goal of Aquarius, and our short definition of the Aquarian mystery school, is having the courage to expand consciousness as far as possible for its own sake. That's why one of the things which gets kind of lost, although I believe that Jaime might have mentioned this, and also Adam might have mentioned this. There is an inherent narcissism that can happen in Aquarius. It's every bit as much as Leo, which is one of the biggest differences between Gemini and Aquarius, because on a lot of levels they can actually seem similar, except Gemini does not have an attachment to anything specific. That's its downside also, but so it can actually shapeshift into whatever it wants. But Aquarius, whoa, man, there's a fixity to that. I mean, there's a self-interest to Aquarius, which is equal to Leo. I mean, those two are both very much about. That's why they represent an incredible important part of the human journey. The willingness to be a sovereign self and the willingness to have the courage to expand consciousness just because that's what we do. It's part of what a human being will do is expand their consciousness. But I'm just simply trying to warn people against fake simulacron globalism. It's a simulacrum of the current globalism idea is a hijack of what Rajar meant by the planetarization of consciousness. So that's why I'm trying to say that by far the shadow of Pluto and Aquarius is digital everything. They now have come up with a simulation of the entire Earth where everything is digitalized down to every molecule, water. And that all that stuff gets like traded on Wall Street. It's like the ultimate way of keeping the fiat system going. You rather than $70 trillion, it ends up becoming $350 trillion. So you can keep feeding the beast by digitalizing everything, and then including humans that have been altered in their DNA, because then you'll essentially be owned by whatever that corporation is that just like you become a GMO. So this is all stuff on the table that the powers that shouldn't be have in mind. And so my job really in my school is to actually call this out. that's why I asked, is there anything out on the table to talk about here?
Oh my gosh. Wow. I'm so glad I met you. This is really amazing.
I'm glad to have shared with you big time because I've been following your stuff for a while, but I never had a chance to discuss astrology with you before, so.
Oh gosh. Well, I know. Oh gosh. This has been so amazing. Wow. So I guess we should probably close. It's so late.
I'm sorry. I wish I could share screen it. I saw this really funny meme that I saw earlier today. And it's an FBI agent peering into a computer, and it says, "Oh my God, I've got to be able to learn this astrology to see if anything they're saying is what would is dangerous."
All right.
Having to learn astrology to just be able to figure out what we're saying here.
All right. Yeah. Gosh.
Thank you so much, Laura. What an honor and pleasure. And Adam and Daniel, I loved this conversation, this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, so great to gather with other fellow astrologers and explorers of esoteric and out there.
You can do a part 2.
Many we can.
This kind of feels like a follow-up to that thing from years ago, that Aquarian High Council where there's basically all those radical, non-conformist, non-mainstream astrologers that showed up and we were able to talk about these things. So it's really
Yeah, that was fun. My friend Emily Trinkus, astrologer, and myself put on this summit of the High Aquarian Council, and we brought all the luminaries. I think you were invited, Laura, but you couldn't make that one. But yeah, super fun.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Do you guys know George Lewis?
See you all down the road. I look forward to talking to each one of you individually. So, all right.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Right.
There's so
Bye,
much
Daniel.
to do together.
Bye, Adam. Love
Great
to
to
all
meet you.
of you. Love you, Sasha, Laura, Adam. Cool.
Bye.